In a land of dust and dreams, one man's last hope is a race against death. Land Grab. Chapter 1. The raw-boned mare, her coat the color of dried mud, drew a final, shuddering breath and dropped her head. From my vantage in the saddle, I watched the last of the sun's light bleed out from behind the jagged peaks of the Sangre de Cristos, spilling a deep and sorrowful purple across the immense, silent land. The air, thick all day with a heat that shimmered and danced, had begun to cool, carrying on its current the scent of sage and distant rain. Below us, nestled in a cradle of rock and dust, lay Rodondo. It wasn't much of a town, not by the standards of a man who'd seen St. Louis and the glitter of the eastern cities. But for this corner of the territories, it was a hub, a place where trails ended and fortunes, some said, began. From this distance, it was a scattering of unpainted lumber and flickering lamplight, a lonely outpost against the encroaching dark. As my mare took her first stiff steps down the winding trail into the valley, the sounds of the place rose to meet us. The tinny heartache of a piano, the sharp crack of a hammer on an anvil, and underneath it all, a low and steady hum of voices like hornets in a nest. This was the sound of a town holding its breath. Rodondo was gripped by rodeo fever. You could taste it in the dust, thick with the passage of 100 extra horses and 1,000 head of cattle. The annual rodeo was more than a contest of skill. It was a ritual, a yearly reckoning where bragging rights were settled, and money, raw and vital, changed hands. But this year felt different. As I guided the mare down the single, wide street, I saw the lines drawn as clear as if they'd been gouged in the dirt with a branding iron. On the saloon porch, their expensive boots propped on the railing, sat the cattle barons. Men like Star Circle Bob Donnell, his face a roadmap of sun and worry, and other broad-hatted, thick-waisted men whose ranches sprawled across tens of thousands of acres. Their talk was loud, their laughter a booming declaration of ownership over this land. They were the kings of this small kingdom, their thrones built of beef and bone. Moving past them in the street, their faces shadowed by the brims of sweat-stained hats, were the others. The small ranchers, the homesteaders, the men who fought tooth and nail for every acre, for every calf that survived the winter. Their knuckles were raw, their eyes narrowed with a permanent squint against the sun and the injustice of a world that seemed stacked against them. They walked with a quiet purpose, their gazes sliding past the men on the porch with a look that was equal parts deference and defiance. They were the ones who saw the rodeo not as a celebration, but as a chance, a slim, desperate chance for a stake big enough to see them through another year. I swung down from the saddle in front of the livery, the muscles in my back and legs screaming a protest that had become a familiar companion. My name is Doc, a handle I picked up more for my tendency to patch up bullet holes than for any formal medical training. I travel light, carrying only what I need, observing more than I speak, a habit that has kept me alive in places where a loose tongue could get a man buried. Even in stranger, the liveryman grunted, a stooped figure with a face like a dried apple. Just in for the show? Something like that, I said, handing him the reins. Give her a good rub down and a double ration of oats. She's earned it. He nodded, casting a professional eye over the mare. Tired horse for a tired land. Town's full up. Every cot and bedroll spoken for. You'll be lucky to find floor space. I paid him and took my saddlebags, the clink of my few belongings a meager sound in the growing noise of the evening. The saloon, the dusty spur, was the town's heart, and tonight its pulse was racing. I pushed through the batwing doors into a wall of heat, smoke, and sound. The air was a foul stew of sweat, cheap whiskey, and tension. Men stood shoulder to shoulder at the bar, their voices a low rumble. I saw a ranch hand I recognized from the Double D outfit lose 3 weeks' pay on a single turn of a card, his face crumbling as he pushed away from the table. I saw a cattleman from the high country quietly slide a pouch of gold to a slick-looking fellow with a diamond stick pin, a man I pegged as a bookmaker taking early bets on the rodeo events. The conflicts were not hidden. They were displayed like goods in a general store. One here was a dispute over water rights flaring up between two men, their hands hovering near their pistols, until the sheriff, a barrel-chested man with weary eyes, stepped between them. There was talk of rustlers growing bold, hitting the smaller spreads that bordered the canyons. And through it all, like a recurring fever, one name kept surfacing in hushed tones and angry whispers: Steele. I found a corner table, ordered a steak and a beer, and settled in to listen. The name belonged to a young rancher, Todd Steele, a man who, by the sound of it, was either a fool or a saint, depending on who was talking. To the small ranchers, he was one of them, a man fighting the same uphill battle. To the barons, he was an obstacle, a man with a piece of land they coveted, a prime section of range with year-round water. He was a problem. The steak was tough, the beer warm, but I'd had worse. I finished my meal, the weariness of the trail settling deep into my bones. The cot in the liveryman's loft felt like a feather bed. I drifted off to the cacophony of Rodondo at night, the town's troubled dreams weaving themselves into my own. Sometime later, a sound pulled me from the shallow depths of sleep. Not the raucous noise from the saloon, but something closer, something furtive. It was the low murmur of voices from the alleyway below the loft's open window. Curiosity, the trait that has led me into more trouble than any vice, compelled me to move. I crawled from my bedroll, the rough floorboards cool against my skin, and crept to the edge of the opening. The moon was a thin silver hook, casting long, distorted shadows that turned the alley into a place of secrets. Two figures stood below, their forms little more than black shapes against the dusty ground. A third man, taller and broader than the others, paced between them. His voice was a low, guttural rasp, the words clipped and dangerous. "It ain't enough," the tall man growled, his bootsteps crunching softly on the gravel. "Weakening the others is one thing. But as long as he's on that land, it's a threat." "He won't sell," a second voice said, thin and reedy. "We've tried pressure. The banks turned him down twice." "Then the pressure needs to change," the tall man snapped. He stopped his pacing and turned to face the others, his silhouette sharp and menacing. "The rodeo gives us our chance. It has to be handled, and handled for good. What about it? Is it settled?" There was a moment of silence, a heavy, charged pause that seemed to hang in the night air. Then the reedy voice spoke again, a single word of confirmation that sealed a pact in the darkness. "Settled." The tall man grunted in satisfaction. "See that it is." He turned and strode down the alley, melting into the deeper shadows at the far end. The other two lingered for a moment, their heads closed together as if in a final, whispered confirmation, before they too vanished, slipping away in opposite directions. I stayed frozen at the window, the cool night air raising gooseflesh on my arms. I hadn't seen their faces, hadn't recognized their voices, but I had heard the malice in their tones. I had heard the clear and unmistakable threat. Two back in my bedroll, sleep was a distant country I could no longer reach. The hornets in the nest were stirring, and I had just stumbled upon the men poking the stick. The Steele problem, whatever its full measure, was about to become Rodondo's problem. And I had a cold feeling, deep in my gut, that blood would be the only thing to settle it. Chapter 2. We are down to the last sack of flour, Swede. Todd Steele spoke the words into the morning air. The air was crisp. It was sharp in his throat. He leaned against the rough wood of the corral. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. It was a hard line of purple rock and pale empty sky. Swede Larson did not look up. He was a giant of a man. His shoulders were as broad as an axe handle. He continued his work. He was mending a piece of tack. His large hands were surprisingly deft. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Yeah, I know, Todd. The coffee is mostly chicory now. The beans are gone. Todd pushed himself off the fence. He was not a large man. He was lean. Wiry strength showed in his arms. His face was tanned dark by the sun. It was a young face, but his eyes were old. They held the look of a man who fought a losing battle every day. The hands at the star circle get paid tomorrow. They will ride into Rodondo. They will drink and gamble their wages away. We don't have 2 bits to rub together. Swede finally looked up. His face was open. His blue eyes were as clear as a child's. He was a loyal hand. He was a simple man. He saw the worry etched on his friend's face. We have the herd. The cattle are good. The herd is too small, Swede. It is not enough to sell. Not yet. We sell now, we have nothing to build on. We lose everything. Todd kicked at a loose stone. Dust puffed up around his worn boot. His financial situation was more than precarious. It was a cliff edge. He was standing on it. The wind was starting to blow. He looked around the small ranch. It was his whole world. The cabin was sturdy. He had built it himself. The barn was solid. He had raised it with Swede's help. But everything had an air of desperation. The paint was gone from the wood. The fences were patched in a dozen places. This was not the dream he had chased. He remembered his arrival. It was 2 years ago. The memory came to him sharp and clear. He was younger then. He rode a fine horse. He had a small stake in his pocket. He had this piece of land. His father's land. He saw not a dusty patch of ground. He saw a future. He saw a kingdom of grass and cattle. The work was brutal. He dug post holes until his hands were raw meat. He cleared stones from the earth one by one. Each stone felt like a boulder. The sun beat down on him. The winter winds tried to tear his cabin apart. He fought for every inch of this place. He struggled to build his ranch from nothing. He held on. He held on when other men would have quit. He held on because of a secret. Swede's voice pulled him back. The horse Tony. He is very fast. Faster than any horse in this valley. Todd nodded. His gaze drifted to the small pasture. A magnificent sorrel horse stood there. Its coat shone like polished copper in the sun. That was Tony. His one piece of perfection in this imperfect world. He is fast. The rodeo comes. The prize for the cow-horse race is big. Swede offered the idea gently. He knew Todd's pride. It takes money to enter Swede. Money for the fee. Money for a new saddle. Money for feed in town. The words tasted like ash. Every solution was another problem. Every door was locked. He needed a key. Later that night, the cabin was silent. Swede snored softly from his bunk. A deep, rumbling sound. Todd sat at the small table. A single lamp cast a circle of yellow light. He reached into a loose floorboard beneath his own bunk. His fingers found the familiar oilskin pouch. He pulled it out. Inside was his secret. It was his hope. It was his curse. It was a map. He unrolled it carefully on the table. The paper was old. It was brittle at the creases. It was his father's map. His father had been a prospector, a man who chased whispers of gold. He had disappeared years ago. He left nothing behind but this land. And this piece of paper. It was not a map of the ranch. It showed mountains he recognized. It showed a twisting canyon. But the markings were strange. They were cryptic clues. 5. A drawing of a broken arrow. A phrase written in his father's hand. Where the sun sleeps in rock. A series of numbers that meant nothing to him. For 2 years he had studied it. He had puzzled over it. He believed it led to a lost gold mine. 6. His father's mine. This was why he held on. This was why he refused to sell to the big outfits. The gold was not just money. It was his inheritance. It was the answer to his father's disappearance. It was proof that his father's life had meant something. The secret burned in him. He had told no one, not even Swede. It was a burden he carried alone. He stared at the map. He traced the strange lines with his finger. Nothing. The meaning was just beyond his grasp. It was like a word on the tip of his tongue. The frustration was a physical thing. It tightened his chest. He could not find the gold. Not yet. But the rodeo was coming. Swede's words came back to him. The horse Tony. He is very fast. The prize was $1,000. It was a fortune. It was enough to save the ranch. It was enough to give him more time. More time to solve this puzzle. A new kind of fire lit in his eyes. It was not the fever of gold. It was the cold flame of decision. He could not wait for a miracle from the ground. He had to make his own miracle. He had to make it with horseflesh and leather and nerve. He carefully folded the map. He slid it back into its oilskin sheath. He placed it gently in its hiding spot. The floorboard settled back into place. His secret was safe again. He stood up. He moved to the cabin door. He pulled it open. The night was vast and cold. The stars were brilliant chips of ice in the blackness. He walked with a new purpose in his step. He went toward the corral. The sorrel horse nickered softly as he approached. Tony knew his touch. Tony trusted him. Todd entered the corral. He ran a hand down the horse's powerful neck. The animal was pure muscle and speed. He was the key. He had to be. Todd reached for the saddle resting on the fence. He swung it off its perch. He lifted it high. He settled it onto Tony's back. Chapter 3. They are vultures, father. They circle and wait. Sylvia Donnell stood beside her father on the porch. The porch overlooked the heart of the Star Circle Ranch. It was a vast operation. Dozens of cowhands moved with practiced ease. Herds of cattle spread like a brown tide across the distant pastures. This was her home. It was her legacy. Star Circle, Bob Donnell chewed on an unlit cigar. His face was a mask of leather. It was tanned by 50 years of sun and wind. His eyes were pale blue. They were troubled. They are businessmen, Sylvia. From back east. They use different weapons than we do. He looked out at his empire. The land stretched to the horizon. It met the sky in a clean, unbroken line. They use ledgers. They use lawyers. They use threats. The Donnell family had a secret. It was a dark cloud in their clear sky. A mysterious land grabber was threatening them. The pressure was constant. It was a slow tightening rope. You have not told me everything. Sylvia's voice was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. She knew her father. She knew the weight he carried behind his eyes. There is nothing more to tell. He said it too quickly. He turned away from her. He looked toward the main corral. Pennington and Brady are here. They want to talk about the rodeo. They want to talk about alliances. They want our water rights. Sylvia's words were sharp. Pennington wants to add this ranch to his collection. Brady wants to prove he is a bigger man than Pennington. They are just different kinds of vultures. Her father sighed. It was a sound of deep weariness. Before he could answer, a commotion erupted from the corral. Shouts. The splintering of wood. A horse screamed. It was a sound of pure fury. In the center of the corral was a whirlwind of motion. A wild stallion. It was a brute, the color of midnight. Its muscles bunched and coiled like serpents. Its eyes were white with rage. 2 ranch hands were trying to get a rope on it. The horse tossed its head. It sent one man flying into the dust. It snapped its teeth at the other. The second man scrambled backward over the fence. Cliff Pennington and Tate Brady watched from a safe distance. They stood near the water trough. They were a study in contrast. Pennington was dressed in fine clothes. His boots were polished. His wealth was a palpable thing. He watched the horse with an appraising eye. He was a man who calculated the value of everything. Brady was charming. He leaned against the trough with a casual grace. A smile played on his lips. But his eyes were cold. They missed nothing. He was a man who took what he wanted. That beast is untamable. Pennington's voice was calm. It was confident. It should be put down. It is a waste of good feed. Brady chuckled. A low, pleasant sound. Everything is a transaction to you, Cliff. Some things just need the right touch. A firm hand. His gaze slid towards Sylvia. The foreman limped over to Star Circle Bob. His face was pale. His arm hung at a strange angle. He is all yours, boss. Broke my arm. He will kill someone before we get a saddle on him. Sylvia did not hesitate. She moved past her father. She walked down the porch steps. She slipped through the corral gate. She moved with a fluid grace. The dust swirled around her boots. Sylvia, no. Her father's voice was sharp with alarm. She ignored him. She ignored the murmurs from the cowhands. She ignored the amused look from Brady and the cold stare from Pennington. Her focus was entirely on the horse. The stallion watched her. It snorted. It pawed the ground. It was a challenge. Sylvia did not have a rope. She did not have a whip. She just walked toward the animal. She moved slowly. She made no sudden moves. She began to speak. Her voice was low. It was a calming murmur. It was not the words. It was the tone. It was a sound of respect. It was a sound of understanding. The horse stopped its frantic dance. It stood its ground. Its ears twitched. It listened. Sylvia kept walking. She kept talking. The space between them shrank. 10 feet. 5 feet. The cowhands held their breath. Pennington leaned forward slightly. His composure was finally cracked. Brady's smile was gone. He was watching with intense focus. Sylvia reached out her hand. She held it steady. The horse watched the hand. It trembled. A ripple of muscle went through its powerful flank. It smelled her scent. It lowered its massive head. It nudged her palm with its nose. A collective sigh went through the onlookers. Sylvia stroked the horse's forehead. She continued her soft murmur. She moved to its side. She ran her hand along its back. The horse stood still. It was a statue of black granite. It had submitted. Not to force. Not to fear. But to a quiet strength it recognized as its equal. She took the lead rope from the ground. She gently looped it over the stallion's neck. She looked back at the assembled men. Her gaze swept over Pennington's stunned face. It passed over Brady's new admiration. She was a woman who could tame the wild. She had impressed them all, too. Her eyes did not linger on them. She turned. She led the now calm horse toward the barn. Its steps were gentle next to hers. She did not look for their approval. She did not need it. The rivalry between Pennington and Brady was a palpable thing behind her. It was a heat she could feel on her back 3. But as she reached the cool darkness of the barn doorway, she paused. She stopped and looked out. Not at the corral. Not at the suitors vying for her attention. Her gaze went far beyond them. It settled on the distant, hazy line of hills to the east. The hills that cradled a small struggling ranch. The one they called Steele's place. Chapter 4. A man's nature is revealed at a card table. I spoke the words to no one. I sat in my corner of the dusty spur saloon. The place was a tinderbox. The rodeo was a day closer. The air was thick with smoke. It was charged with greed. I nursed a beer. I watched the town's royalty play their games. Cliff Pennington sat at a table. He was playing poker. He did not look like a cattleman. His hands were smooth. His suit was expensive. It was out of place in this dusty room. He was a man of immense wealth. Everyone knew that. No one knew how he got it. Rumors clung to him like burrs on a saddle blanket. They said he had interests in railroads. They said he owned silver mines in Colorado. They said his money was old. It came from back east. But I had seen men like him before. Men whose fortunes appeared as if by magic. Their money was often rooted in dark soil. Pennington played cards like he managed his life. He took no risks. He made no mistakes. He bled the other players dry. He did it with a cold, surgical precision. His face showed no emotion. He was a man of secrets. His income had a mysterious source. It was a shadow that followed him everywhere. Across the room stood Tate Brady. He was not playing cards. He was the center of a different kind of circle. He held a whiskey glass. His laughter was easy. His smile was a weapon. He was telling a story. Men listened to him. They were drawn to his charm. They were drawn to his confidence. I had seen his type too. A man who could talk a bird out of a tree, then sell the tree for firewood. He had connections. I heard the whispers. I saw the men who drank with him. They had the hard look of night riders. They were men who knew the rustlers' trails. Brady was charming. There was no doubt. But underneath the charm, there was a ruthless edge. It was a glint of cold steel in his eyes. My curiosity is a restless thing. It is a hound that always needs a scent. The scent in Rodondo was Todd Steele. It was his father. I wanted to know more. I left the saloon's noise behind. I walked to the livery. The old man was braiding a new rope. His hands were gnarled but sure. Evening, Doc. He did not look up. Evening, I replied. Busy day. Always busy before the rodeo. He spat a stream of tobacco juice. It hit the dirt with a sizzle. Town is full of money. And fools. I leaned against a stall. The air smelled of hay and horse. That young man Steele. He seems to be on everyone's mind. The liveryman grunted. He has a good piece of land. That creek of his runs year-round. Men kill for that kind of water. He paused. He looked at me. His eyes were shrewd. You are not the first to ask about the Steeles. My interest sharpened. Oh. No. That fancy man Pennington was in here yesterday. He wanted to know about Old Man Steele. Asked what happened to him. When he disappeared. Who his partners were. This was a surprise. Pennington was a careful man. He did not ask idle questions. The liveryman went on. Then this morning that slick one Brady comes by. He asks the same things. He was smoother about it. But he wanted the same answers. What happened to Todd Steele's father? My mind worked on this new information. Both men were circling Todd's ranch. Now I knew they were also digging into his past. They were looking for something. Something connected to a man who had vanished years ago. The game was deeper than a simple land grab. It was about history. It was about shadows from the past. I thanked the liveryman. I walked back into the street. The sun was setting. It painted the dust in the air a pale orange. The sounds of the town were changing. The workday was done. The night's business was beginning. Men were moving toward the saloons. Their spurs made a lonely music on the boardwalks. Then I saw him. He was standing across the street. He was in the deep shadow of the assayer's office. I had not seen him arrive. He seemed to have materialized from the dusk itself. He was a stranger. He was dressed entirely in black. A black hat was pulled low. It hid his face. A black duster hung to his boots. Black gloves covered his hands. He was tall. He was unnaturally still. He was a piece of the night come early. He was not looking at any one thing. He was watching everyone. His head turned slowly. He surveyed the street. He surveyed the men on it. His gaze was a physical weight. I felt it even from across the street. The easy noise of the town seemed to falter. Men glanced his way. They quickly looked away. They moved a little faster. A chill crept into the evening air. It had nothing to do with the temperature. This was not a rancher. This was not a gambler. This was not a lawman. This was something else. This was a man who brought trouble, as surely as a storm brings rain. He was a specter of violence waiting to happen. He stood there for a long time. He was a statue carved from shadow. Then he moved. His motion was fluid. It was deliberate. He pushed himself away from the wall. He stepped out of the alley's darkness. He started to cross the street. He did not hurry. He did not look left or right. He walked as if he owned the ground beneath his feet. He walked as if the men scrambling out of his path did not exist. He reached my side of the street. He stepped onto the boardwalk. His boots made a heavy, solid sound. He did not look at me. He did not look at the saloon. He turned. He walked down the narrow alley between the hotel and the mercantile. He disappeared into the blackness. He left only silence behind him. Chapter 5. Let the building commence. The rodeo waits for no man. The voice boomed across the flats east of Rodondo. It belonged to a stout man with a megaphone. He stood on a half-finished platform. Below him was a scene of furious activity. The rodeo preparations had begun in earnest. A raw new energy buzzed through the town. It was the energy of hope. It was the energy of greed. Wagons hauled fresh-cut pine from the hills. The scent of sawdust was sharp in the air. Hammers rang out in a steady, chaotic rhythm. The grandstands rose from the dust. They were a skeleton of wood against the sky. Men shouted. Horses whinnied. The entire town was focused on this one patch of ground. This would be the arena. This would be where fortunes were won and lost. A long track was being cleared for the races. Men with shovels and plows carved a raw brown scar into the prairie grass. The stakes were being set for the coming battle too. I watched from the edge of the grounds. The spectacle was a thing to behold. It was a small city being born from dust and sweat. Then I saw him. Todd Steele walked through the chaos. He moved with a grim purpose. His loyal man Swede followed a few paces behind him. They were two small figures against the grand scale of the preparations. They walked toward a tent where the officials sat. Todd stopped before a long table. A man with a green eyeshade looked up at him. Name? Todd Steele. Event? The working cow horse race. The official grunted. He consulted a list. That will be a $50 entry fee. $50 was a king's ransom to a man like Steele. I saw him hesitate for a moment. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a worn leather pouch. He counted out the coins. They made a small, lonely pile on the table. It was likely the last of his money. He was betting everything on his horse. He was betting everything on this one race 3. He pushed the coins forward. His whole future went with them. The official swept the money into a cash box. He wrote Todd's name in a large ledger. Steele is in. Horse's name? Tony. Todd's voice was quiet. It was full of pride. He turned and walked away. He did not look back. He had crossed his Rubicon. As he left, another man arrived. This man drew a different kind of attention. He was old. His back was stooped. He wore a rumpled suit that had seen better decades. A pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His eyes were watery, but they missed nothing. This was old Grundy. He was the bookmaker for. He did not shout or advertise. He did not need to. He simply set a small folding table and a stool near the entrance to the grounds. He opened a large leather-bound book. He laid a pencil beside it. That was all it took. Men began to drift toward him. They came like iron filings to a magnet. Old Grundy had a shady past 5. The stories said he had run gambling dens in New Orleans. They said he had fled Chicago one step ahead of the law. They said he had connections to the big syndicates back East 6. He was more than a simple bookie. He was an institution. He set the odds. And where Grundy set the odds, the money flowed. He took a rancher's bet on a bronc rider. He scribbled in his book. He accepted a pouch of gold from a cattle baron. His face was a blank slate. He was the high priest of chance. His arrival meant the stakes were now official. They were written in his book. Night fell. The hammering stopped. The grounds grew quiet. A full moon rose. It bathed the half-finished structures in a ghostly white light. I was restless. A feeling of unease kept me from my bed. The memory of the man in black was a cold spot in my mind. I walked toward the livery. It was a temporary structure near the grounds. A long row of stalls for the contestants' horses. I saw a light in the stall where Tony was kept. I moved closer. I stayed in the shadows. A figure slipped out of the darkness. It was a man. He was thin. He moved with a skulking gait. I could not see his face. It was hidden by his hat. He carried no lantern. He moved like a ghost. He crept to the water barrel outside Tony's stall. The barrel was full. It was fresh water for the horse. The man looked around. His movements were quick. They were furtive. He pulled a small cloth bag from his pocket. He untied it. He poured a fine white powder into the water. The powder dissolved instantly. It left no trace. He was poisoning the water 7. It was the first move. It was sabotage 8. The man straightened up. He started to turn. He meant to slip away as quietly as he had come. Then another sound came from the darkness. A heavy shuffling sound. The sound of large boots on loose dirt. Swede Larson appeared. He was humming a tuneless song. He carried an empty bucket. He was coming for water. The saboteur froze. He was caught between the stall and the open ground. He flattened himself into the shadows against the livery wall. He was a breath away from being discovered. Swede did not see him. Swede's mind was on his task. He reached the water barrel. He yawned a great wide yawn. He set his bucket down. He stretched his huge arms. He was tired. His boot caught the edge of his own bucket. He stumbled forward with a grunt. His big body collided with the water barrel. The barrel tipped. It fell with a heavy crash. The poisoned water gushed out. It soaked into the thirsty ground. It formed a dark spreading stain in the moonlight. Swede stared at the empty barrel. He stared at the puddle. "Ah, nuts," he mumbled to himself. He did not know what he had done. He did not know he had just saved the horse. He had accidentally prevented the disaster 9. He just saw a clumsy mistake. He sighed. He picked up the fallen barrel. He turned to go back to the main well. The saboteur waited. He remained motionless in the shadows. After Swede was gone, he slid away. He vanished back into the night. He left nothing behind. Nothing but the damp earth. Nothing but the faint chemical smell that hung in the air. A smell that only a man standing where I was could detect. Chapter 6. They took the whole herd. Every last one. The man swayed in the saddle. His face was white with shock. His horse was lathered in sweat. It had been ridden hard. He had just galloped into the center of Rodondo. He brought with him the first wave of a storm. The storm was called night riders. His shout cut through the morning calm. Men spilled out of the saloon. They came from the hotel. They came from the livery. A crowd gathered around the exhausted rider. His name was Miller. He had a small spread 10 miles south of town. Who took them? The sheriff demanded. His hand rested on his gun. I don't know. Miller's voice was hollow. There were too many of them. They came in the dark. They moved like ghosts. My boys were asleep. They cut the fences. They were gone before we even knew what happened. He was not the last. An hour later, another rancher rode in. His story was the same. His herd was stolen. Then a third came. He was a homesteader from the West Canyons. The rustlers had taken his few cattle. They had even taken his milk cow. A wave of ruin was sweeping across the territory. Panic began to take root. It was a cold and ugly weed. I listened to the stories. I watched the faces of the men. I saw the fear. I saw the despair. These were not random attacks. A pattern began to emerge. The rustlers did not hit the big ranches. The Star Circle was untouched. Pennington's vast herds were safe. The targets were all the same. They were small ranchers. They were men on the edge. They were men who had bet their last dollar on the rodeo. It was a coordinated campaign. It was designed to break them. It was meant to wipe them off the map before the contest even began. The rustling was a weapon. It was aimed at the heart of the town's independent spirit. It was meant to weaken specific men. It was an organized purge. The night was a black blanket. No moon. No stars. The wind whispered through the dry grass around Todd Steele's cabin. Inside, Swede was asleep. Todd was not. He sat cleaning his rifle. A deep unease kept him awake. He had heard the news from town. He knew the riders were out. He was waiting for them. A sound came from the darkness. It was a soft sound. A single cow lowing nervously. It was a sound of distress. Todd was on his feet in an instant. He grabbed his rifle. He moved to the sleeping form of his friend. Swede. Wake up. Trouble. Swede was awake immediately. He needed no explanation. He grabbed his own shotgun from the wall. They slipped out of the cabin. They moved into the oppressive dark. They crept toward the small pasture where their herd was held. Their small herd was their entire future. It was everything. They saw them then. Shadows moving among shadows. A half-dozen men on horseback. They were methodically cutting the fence wires. They were preparing to drive the cattle out. They were quiet. They were professional. They were rustlers. Todd raised his rifle. He took aim at the nearest shadow. He did not shout a warning. A warning was a fool's game. He fired. The rifle's crack shattered the night. The shadow he aimed at cried out. The man fell from his saddle. The other riders reacted instantly. They were not spooked. They were fighters. Muzzle flashes erupted from the darkness. Bullets whizzed past Todd's head. They thudded into the wall of the cabin behind him. Get down, Todd yelled. He and Swede dropped behind a low rock wall. The gunfight was fierce too. It was a chaotic storm of noise and violence. The air filled with the sharp smell of gunpowder. The rustlers charged forward. They fired from their horses. They were trying to overrun the ranch. Todd and Swede fought back. They were terribly outgunned. But they knew this ground. They knew every rock. They knew every dip in the earth. Swede's shotgun boomed. It spewed a wide pattern of destruction into the night. A horse screamed and went down. Its rider was pinned beneath it. Todd's rifle was methodical. He fired. He moved. He fired again. He made every shot count. He was not just protecting cattle. He was protecting his father's legacy. He was protecting his one desperate chance. The fight seemed to last an eternity. The rustlers were relentless. But Todd and Swede did not break. Their defense was stubborn. It was furious. The rustlers had expected an easy raid. They had not expected a war. One of them shouted a command. They began to fall back. They pulled their wounded man onto a horse. They melted back into the night. They left behind a dead horse and the smell of blood on the wind. Todd and Swede stood in the silence. Their ears were ringing. Their hearts were pounding. They had fought them off. Their small herd was safe. For now. Miles away, another drama unfolded. It was a quieter affair. Sylvia Donnell walked toward her private quarters. The main house of the Star Circle was dark. Her father was in Rodondo. He was meeting with the other cattle barons. They were discussing the rustling. She reached her door. She saw it immediately. A piece of paper was pinned to the wood. A hunting knife held it in place. The knife's point was sunk deep into the door. It was a violation. It was a threat. Her hands trembled slightly. She pulled the knife from the wood. It was heavy in her hand. She took the note. She unfolded the cheap paper. The words were written in a crude, blocky script. The message was short. It was brutal. Stay away from Steele or pay the price. 5. She read the words twice. Her fear was a cold knot in her stomach. But something else rose with it. A hot, defiant anger. They thought they could scare her. They thought a note and a knife would make her obedient. They did not know her. They did not know the strength she possessed. The world wanted to put her in a box. It wanted to tell her who to see. It wanted to tell her what to do. She would not allow it. She would not be threatened. She would not be controlled. She looked at the ugly words one last time. Then her hand closed. She crushed the note into a tight, hard ball inside her fist. Chapter 7. I cannot hold them off again, Doc. Todd Steele's voice was rough. It was scraped raw by smoke and exhaustion. We stood in the cool light of dawn. The air still smelled of gunpowder. A dead horse lay bloating in the sun. The ground was scarred by bullets. The attack had left its mark on the land. It had left its mark on him. They will come back, he said. They want this land. They will not stop. He looked at me. His eyes were desperate. He had been carrying his burden alone. The weight was finally crushing him. I have to trust someone. I choose to trust you. He led me inside the cabin. The room was dark. The windows were small. He knelt by his bunk. He pried a loose floorboard. His hands pulled out the oilskin pouch. I had seen him with it before. I did not know what it held. He placed it on the small wooden table. His hands trembled as he unrolled the paper inside. 1. It was a map. It was old. It was cracked along its folds. The markings were faint. This was my father's, Todd said. His voice was barely a whisper. He was a prospector. He found something out here. Something big. He told me stories of a lost gold mine. 2. I looked at the map. It was a puzzle. A riddle drawn on sheepskin. There were mountains I recognized. There was a drawing of a crooked tree. There was a phrase written in faded ink. Where the sun sleeps in rock. I've held this secret for 2 years. Todd's face was a mask of pain. It's why I've stayed. It's why I've fought. I thought I could find it alone. I was a fool. I leaned closer. I studied the cryptic drawing. My mind has always been good with puzzles. It is a lockpick for the world's secrets. We looked at the map together. We were 2 men against a rising tide of violence. This piece of paper was our only hope. The sun sleeps in rock, I murmured. I thought of the land around Rodondo. I had ridden through it for days. There are 1,000 rock formations out there. I know. Todd's voice was full of frustration. I have searched dozens of them. My eyes fell on another part of the map. A series of numbers. They were written near a drawing of a large flat-topped butte. What about these numbers? I thought they were dates. Or maybe a code. I could never make sense of them. I looked at the butte. I knew the one. It stood near the new rodeo grounds. This butte. It has a name. The old-timers call it the grandstand. The rodeo. The preparations. The thought sparked something in my mind. A race is measured in yards, Todd. What if these are not dates? What if they are distances? A new light entered Todd's eyes. We bent over the map. The numbers were 400, 250, 100. There were arrows beside them. The arrows pointed north, south, and east. It was a set of directions. Directions from a starting point. We had to find the starting point. The crooked tree, I said. My finger traced its shape on the map. There is an old dead cottonwood. It is right at the edge of the rodeo grounds. I saw it yesterday. We had it. The clues were falling into place. The map was pointing to a location. A location right next to the rodeo. A place hundreds of people would be gathering. The gold was hidden in plain sight. That night, I rode back to town. The discovery had made me restless. The danger felt closer than ever. I watched the town from the shadows of the hotel porch. I saw a figure emerge from the saloon. It was Cliff Pennington. He moved with a quiet urgency. He did not go to his room. He walked toward the dark edge of town. My instincts took over. I followed him. He led me to a deserted lane behind the blacksmith shop. The air was cold. The only light came from a sliver of moon. Pennington stopped. He waited. A moment later, another figure appeared. It was the stranger in black. 4. The stranger was a column of darkness. He dominated the lane. Pennington seemed small beside him. I was too far away to hear their words. I could only see their shapes. I saw Pennington hand the stranger a thick envelope. The stranger took it. He did not look at it. He said something to Pennington. Pennington's posture was stiff. He looked like a schoolboy being reprimanded. The stranger in black gave a sharp nod. Then he turned. He melted back into the night. Pennington stood alone for a long moment. He looked like a man who had just sold his soul. I felt a deep chill. The conspiracy was real. Pennington was part of it. The man in black was the enforcer. I started back toward the livery. My mind was racing. I had to warn Todd. Then I saw it. A flicker of orange against the black horizon. It was in the direction of Steele's ranch. The flicker grew. It became a glow. It was a fire. I spurred my horse. I rode hard. The globe became a pillar of flame. It was licking at the night sky. I arrived to a scene of hell. The ranch house was burning. 5 great sheets of fire devoured the dry wood. Todd and Swede were silhouettes against the blaze. They were throwing buckets of water. Their efforts were hopeless against the inferno. I leaped from my horse. I grabbed a bucket. I joined their desperate fight. The heat was a physical blow. The smoke was a choking blanket. The roar of the fire was the sound of a hungry beast. We fought side by side. We battled the flames for what felt like hours. We refused to surrender the cabin. We saved it. Barely. The fire was finally out. The 3 of us stood together. We were covered in soot. We were gasping for air. The cabin was a ruin. One wall was gone. The roof was a skeleton of charred beams. The smell of ash was the smell of defeat. Arson. 6. There was no doubt. Todd stumbled through the wreckage. He looked at what was left of his home. His face was a gray mask of despair in the dying light of the embers. He knelt in the ashes. His hands sifted through the warm debris. He was searching for something. His fingers closed around a familiar shape. He pulled it free. It was the oilskin pouch. It was scorched. It was blackened. But it was intact. He clutched it to his chest. He had lost his home. He had nearly lost his life. But he had not lost his father's secret. Chapter 8. You have a problem with me, Steele. Tate Brady's voice cut through the street noise. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. He stood in the middle of the dusty street. His hand was near the pearl handle of his pistol. His easy charm was gone. His eyes were chips of ice. I saw Todd Steele freeze. He had been loading lumber into a wagon. He was rebuilding after the fire. He slowly turned to face his challenger. My only problem is men who mistake a woman's strength for an invitation. Todd's voice was low. It was steady. Sylvia Donnell is her own woman. She makes her own choices. Brady laughed. The sound had no humor. She let a dirt rancher court her. That is an insult to her name. It is an insult to me. I am here to correct that insult. I challenge you to a gunfight over Sylvia's honor. 1. The town went silent. People stopped in their tracks. They backed away slowly. They formed a wide circle. This was a formal challenge. A duel to the death. The sheriff was nowhere to be seen. No one would interfere. Todd looked at Brady. He saw the cold certainty in the man's eyes. This was not about honor. This was an execution. It was another attempt to remove him. He dropped the piece of lumber he was holding. It hit the dirt with a soft thud. He nodded once. He accepted. The two men faced each other across the street. The distance was 50 yards. It was a lifetime. They began to walk. They moved toward the center of the town. Their steps were slow. They were deliberate. Each man was a study in concentration. Their hands hovered over their guns. The silence was a heavy blanket. The sun beat down. The only sound was the scuff of their boots in the deep dust. I watched from the boardwalk. I felt a cold dread. This was wrong. This was a murder arranged for an audience. They were 20 paces apart. Their hands tensed. They were ready to draw. A new sound ripped the air apart. It was not a gunshot. It was a scream. A high piercing cry from the hills above the town. It was a war cry. It was followed by another. Then a dozen more. The showdown was interrupted. 2 Apache raiders were attacking the town. 3. They came from all sides. They poured over the low ridges. They were a wave of motion and fury. Arrows hissed through the air. They thudded into buildings. They found flesh. A man in the crowd cried out. He fell with a shaft in his chest. Panic erupted. The circle of spectators dissolved into a screaming mob. Todd and Brady forgot each other instantly. Their personal war was erased by a larger one. Todd dove behind a water trough. A rifle appeared in his hands. He began firing. His shots were calm. They were measured. He was a man who had seen battle before. Brady took cover behind a stack of barrels. He drew his pistol. He began to shoot with a deadly grace. The fight for Rodondo had begun. Men grabbed rifles from the general store. They fired from windows. They fired from rooftops. Cliff Pennington was there. He had been watching the duel with a cold smile. The smile was gone now. His face was a mask of fear. An Apache warrior on a painted pony charged at him. Pennington fumbled for a small pistol inside his coat. He fired wildly. He missed. But the warrior turned away. He sought a more dangerous target. Todd Brady and Pennington had to work together to defend Rodondo. 4. They were no longer rivals. They were just men trying to stay alive. The battle was chaos. It was blood and thunder. 5. The Apache were skilled fighters. They moved through the town like angry spirits. They set fire to a wagon. The black smoke billowed into the sky. The fighting was street to street. It was house to house. I saw Tate Brady get cornered. He was behind the blacksmith shop. His pistol was empty. He was trying to reload. 3 warriors were closing in on him. They moved with a grim purpose. Brady was a dead man. He knew it. He threw his empty gun at one. He prepared to die. One of the warriors raised a lance. He was ready for the final thrust. A rifle cracked from a rooftop across the street. The warrior with the lance stiffened. He looked down at the red stain on his chest. He toppled from his horse. Brady stared in shock. He looked up at the roof. Todd Steele stood there against the sky. He lowered his smoking rifle. He had seen Brady's plight. He had fired the shot. He had saved the life of the man who tried to kill him minutes earlier. Their rivalry was now impossibly complicated. A look passed between them. It was a look of disbelief. It was a look of confusion. It was a look of debt. The moment was shattered by the ongoing battle. Another warrior was charging Todd's position on the roof. Todd did not look at Brady again. He turned his attention back to the fight. He levered a fresh cartridge into the rifle's chamber. He took aim. He fired. Chapter 9. They are gone. The sheriff's voice was a ragged whisper. He stood in the middle of the street. The street was littered with the awful debris of battle. The Apache had vanished back into the hills. They left behind a great and terrible silence. The smoke from burning buildings stung the eyes. The smell of blood was heavy in the air. The town of Rodondo had survived. But it was wounded. It was bleeding. In the aftermath of the attack, a strange peace settled over the people. The old grudges seemed small now. They seemed foolish. Temporary truces were formed in the shared language of grief and survival. I saw men who were enemies yesterday working side by side. They carried the wounded. They covered the faces of the dead. I watched Todd Steele. He was helping a rancher lift a heavy beam from a collapsed awning. Near him stood Tate Brady. Brady's arm was in a sling. He had a bandage on his head. He watched Todd. His expression was a mixture of things I could not name. There was no gratitude in it. There was no friendship. There was only a deep and grudging confusion. The duel was a ghost between them. The debt of a life was an invisible chain connecting them. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their silence was louder than any words. Even Cliff Pennington worked. His fine suit was torn and stained with soot. He looked pale. He looked shaken. His money had not protected him. The violence had touched him too. Then Sylvia Donnell rode into town. She was a vision of life in a landscape of death. Her horse was breathing hard. She must have ridden like the wind. She swung down from the saddle. She did not cry. She did not scream. Her face was set with a fierce determination. She took charge. "We need bandages," she called out. Her voice was clear and strong. "Tear up sheets. Anything you can find. We need clean water. Boil it first." She moved to the first wounded man she saw. She knelt in the dust. Her hands were gentle. They were sure. She showed her strength. She showed her compassion. She tore a strip of cloth from her own petticoat. She expertly tied a bandage around the man's bleeding leg. She organized the other women. She created a makeshift hospital in the center of the street. She was a queen commanding her court. Her throne was a blood-stained patch of dirt. She was magnificent. I did my part. I helped where I could. My knowledge of wounds was basic, but useful. I set a broken bone. I stitched a deep cut. As I worked, my mind was busy. My eyes were always watching. Something about the attack felt wrong. The Apache were brave fighters. They were skilled hunters. But this was different. This was a military operation. I walked to the edge of town. I looked at the body of a fallen warrior. He lay near the livery. I had seen him go down. I knelt beside him. His rifle was a standard repeating model, but his ammunition belt was new. The leather was too clean, and tucked into his waistband was a pistol. It was a Colt Peacemaker. It was the same kind of gun every man in town carried. It was not a weapon of the Apache. My unease grew. I moved through the town. I retraced the path of the attack. They had known exactly where to strike. They had avoided the places where the best gunmen were gathered. They had attacked the weak points. They had known the town's defenses. It was impossible, unless someone had told them. The cold realization settled in my gut. Someone had been feeding information to the Apache. The rustling, the fire, the attack. It was all connected. It was a single serpent with many heads. My thoughts went to the stranger in black. He was the one piece that did not fit. I scanned the crowds. I looked through the makeshift hospital. He was gone. He had vanished during the chaos. No one mentioned seeing him. It was as if he had never been there at all. I walked to the lane behind the blacksmith shop. This was where he had met Pennington. The ground was scuffed from the battle. A dead horse lay nearby. I searched the area. I looked for any sign, any clue. I found nothing but spent cartridges and dust. I was about to give up. I turned to leave. My boot kicked something small. It made a dull, metallic sound. I looked down. Half buried in the dirt was a small silver object. It was tarnished with soot and grime. I bent down. I picked it up. It was a cigar case. It was finely made. It was heavier than it looked. I wiped the dirt from its surface. There was an insignia engraved on the lid. It was a strange design. A hawk with a broken arrow in its talons. It was a very specific clue. It was a clue about Todd's father. It was a thing left behind by a ghost. I closed my hand around it. The cold metal felt dangerous in my palm. Chapter 10. I need lumber. I need seed. I need a new roof. Todd Steele spoke the words to the open air. We stood in the blackened ruins of his cabin. The morning sun cast long shadows through the charred beams. His face was grim. His resolve was a hard line. The rodeo is still a week away. I cannot wait for the prize money. I have to try the bank again. I did not try to stop him. A man has to walk his own path. I walked with him. We left Swede to guard the ranch. We rode into Rodondo. The town was still wounded from the Apache raid. But the bank was untouched. It was a stone fortress in a town of wood and dust. It was a monument to a different kind of power. The air inside was cool and still. It smelled of old paper and polished wood. Banker Josephs sat behind a large oak desk. He was a small man in a big chair. His face was pale. His eyes darted around nervously. He looked like a rabbit in a cage made of gold. Todd stood before the desk. He did not remove his hat. Josephs. I need a loan. The banker licked his dry lips. He shook his head before Todd could even finish. I am sorry, Steele. The answer is no. The bank cannot take the risk. You did not even ask how much, Todd said. His voice was dangerously quiet. The amount does not matter. Josephs fidgeted with a letter opener. His hands trembled. Your collateral is insufficient. The ranch is not profitable. My ranch was attacked, Todd countered. His voice rose. My house was burned. Is that not a special circumstance? It is a tragedy. Josephs would not meet his eyes. But business is business. The loan is denied. I stepped forward. I placed the silver cigar case on the polished desk. The engraved insignia faced up. The hawk. The broken arrow. We know you are being pressured, Josephs. The banker stared at the case. All the color drained from his face. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He pushed his chair back. It scraped loudly on the floor. Where did you get that? It was dropped, I said. By a man who met with Pennington. A man in a black duster. Josephs collapsed in his chair. The fight went out of him. The words began to spill from his mouth. They were short. They were panicked. They were the confession of a broken man. You do not understand. You cannot fight them. Try us, Todd said. It is a syndicate. Josephs's voice was a frantic whisper. A powerful cattle syndicate from back east. One, they want everything. They want to control all the local ranches. Two, they have men everywhere. They are buying politicians. They are buying lawmen. They are buying me. He buried his face in his hands. They control my debt. They could ruin me in a day. Todd stood like a statue. He was absorbing the poison. He was finally seeing the shape of the enemy. Pennington? Todd asked. A pawn, Joseph sobbed. They own his mines. They control his investments. He does what they say. 3. And Brady? I asked. Brady is different. He is not owned. He is ambitious. They promised him control of this entire territory. He thinks he is their partner. He is just another tool. For another unwilling pawn in a larger scheme. 5. Josephs looked up. His eyes were wild with fear. They use him to stir up trouble. They use him to push men like you out of the way. And the man who pulls the strings? I pressed. The man who carries this case. He is their enforcer. 6. The banker shuddered. He is their devil. He comes to make sure we all play our parts. He gives the orders. He ensures obedience. His name is Morrison. The name meant nothing to us. But the description did. The stranger in black finally had a name. I have one more question, I said. My voice was low. This man Morrison. What do you know about him? Josephs looked at Todd. He looked at him with a kind of pity. He has been here before. A long time ago. He was a prospector. He had a partner. They were looking for gold in the hills. He paused. He took a deep breath. He delivered the final killing blow. The syndicate's enforcer is the stranger in black. And he knew your father, Todd. 7. The room went completely still. The only sound was the frantic ticking of a clock on the wall. The world had shifted. The land grab. The gold mine. The murder of his father. It was all one story. It was all one man. Morrison. Todd did not speak. He did not look at Josephs. He looked at the silver case on the desk. He looked at the ugly truth engraved upon it. He turned slowly. His movements were stiff. He was a man carrying an impossible weight. He walked toward the door. He did not look back. He pushed the bank door open. He walked out into the harsh, bright sunlight. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he was going forward. He was walking toward a confrontation that had started before he was even born. Chapter 11. He trusted him, Doc. My father trusted that man. Todd's voice was hollow. It was the sound of a foundation cracking. We sat by a small fire near the ruin of his home. The banker's words hung in the air between us. They were a poison that had finally found its victim. Todd stared into the flames. He was seeing a ghost there. He was seeing the past. The past was a sun-scorched canyon. Two men worked a rock face. One man was Henry Steele. He was Todd's father. His face was lined with optimism. His eyes were clear. He believed in hard work. He believed in loyalty. He believed in his partner. The other man was Jack Morrison. He was not yet the man in black. But the shadows were already in his eyes. He was younger. He was leaner. His smile did not reach his eyes. His greed was a coiled snake inside him. They had been partners for a year. They shared their food. They shared their dreams. Then one day they found it. Henry Steele saw it first. A thin yellow vein in the quartz. It was a promise whispered from the heart of the mountain. Gold. Not just flakes. Not just dust. A rich vein. A river of rock-bound sunlight. It was a king's fortune. Henry threw his arms around his partner. He laughed. It was the laugh of a man whose dreams had just come true. Morrison laughed with him. But Morrison's laugh was different. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut. He saw the gold. He did not see a shared future. He saw only his own future. He saw Henry as an obstacle. A partner was a man who took half. Morrison wanted it all. The betrayal did not happen overnight. It was a slow poison. Morrison began to talk about claim jumpers. He planted seeds of fear in Henry's mind. He said they needed to be careful. He said they needed to be quiet. He was isolating Henry. He was preparing the ground. One evening, Morrison returned to their camp. He was not alone. Two hard-faced men were with him. Friends of mine, Morrison said. They can help us work the claim faster. They can help us guard it. Henry Steele was a trusting man. He welcomed them. He shared his fire with them. He did not see the hunger in their eyes. He did not see the conspiracy that bound the three men together. He did not see that his partner had become his judge, his jury, his executioner. The next day, they went into the mine. The four of them. Morrison stayed near the entrance. He was keeping watch, he said. Henry was at the rock face. He was working the rich vein. His back was turned. The two new men raised their pickaxes. Henry never saw the blows that killed him. He died in his own mine. He was murdered by his own partner. Black Jack Morrison had become a claim jumper. He had betrayed his friend for a mountain of gold. Morrison and his men buried the body in a shallow side tunnel. They collapsed the entrance. They made it look like an accident. Then Morrison did a clever thing. He created the cryptic map. It was his insurance. It was his secret key. He could not work the mine then. It was too soon. Too many questions would be asked. He left the territory. He joined the growing cattle syndicate. He used his ruthlessness to climb its ranks. He became their enforcer. He waited for years. He let the story of Henry Steele fade into a ghost story. Now he was back. He was back for his gold. He was manipulating events to get Todd Steele out of the way. He would bankrupt the son. He would drive him off the land. Then he would reclaim the mine. He would finally claim the fortune he had murdered for. The vision in the fire faded. Todd looked up at me. His eyes were no longer hollow. They were filled with a cold fire. The grief was still there. But now it had a purpose. It had a name. "We are going there, Doc. Tonight." We rode under the cover of darkness. We avoided the main trails. We used the knowledge from the map. We tethered our horses in a hidden ravine. We approached the rodeo grounds on foot. The place was dark and silent. The grandstands were empty skeletons under the stars. We found the old crooked tree. It stood like a silent sentinel. From there, we followed the map's directions. I paced off the distances. 400 yards north, 250 yards east, 100 yards south. We stood before a sheer rock wall. It looked solid. It looked impassable. There was no sign of an entrance. "It has to be here," Todd whispered. I ran my hands over the rock face. I felt for a crack. I felt for a seam. Then I saw it. A thick growth of brush and thorn bush. It was clustered unnaturally at the base of the cliff. We tore it away. Our hands were cut and bleeding. Behind it was a dark opening. It was barely big enough for a man to crawl through. It was the entrance to the mine. It was the entrance to Henry Steele's tomb. We lit a lantern. We crawled inside. The air was stale. It was cold. It smelled of damp earth and forgotten time. The lantern light pushed back the oppressive darkness. The tunnel was narrow. It was crudely dug. We walked deeper into the mountain's heart. We found the spot where the main vein was. The quartz glittered in the lantern light. The gold was still there. It mocked us with its silent beauty. "He never got to enjoy it," Todd said. His voice echoed in the silence. We searched the side tunnels. In the third one, we found it. A section of the tunnel had collapsed. A pile of loose rock and dirt blocked the way. We began to dig with our bare hands. The work was grim. After a few minutes, my fingers touched something. It was not rock. It was smooth. It was rounded. I pulled it free. It was a bone. We dug faster. We uncovered more. A rib cage. A skull. It was a human skeleton. It was the evidence of the murder. It was the ghost of the mine. Todd knelt beside the remains. His face was a stone mask. He reached into the dirt beside the skull. His fingers found something. He pulled it out. It was a tarnished metal buckle. An H was elaborately tooled into its center. It was his father's initial. Todd held the buckle in the palm of his hand. He was finally touching his father's ghost. Chapter 12. The Steel Boy is finished. His ranch is ash. His spirit is broken. Blackjack Morrison's voice was a low rumble. It was the sound of grinding stone. He stood in the shadows of the livery. He spoke to a thin, nervous man. The man who had tried to poison Todd's horse. "Now the rest of the pieces fall. The rodeo will make me a rich man. The race is a farce. We will have the winning ticket." The thin man nodded eagerly. His fear of Morrison was a visible thing. Morrison smiled. It was a predator's smile. It held no warmth. "The Donnell girl is next. Her father is old. He is weak. Once I have her, I will have the Star Circle. The syndicate will control this entire valley. Pennington is a whipped dog. Brady is a fool who thinks he controls his own destiny. My plan is perfect. Now go. It is time. Take the horse." The thin man scurried away into the night. He was a rat, obeying his king. Morrison watched him go. He was a man, admiring his own handiwork. He was closing his trap on Rodondo. At the Star Circle Ranch, a different kind of trap was being sprung. A trap of conscience. Cliff Pennington stood on the porch. He faced Sylvia Donnell. The moonlight painted his face in shades of gray. He was no longer the confident cattle baron. He was a man haunted by his own choices. "I cannot do this anymore, Sylvia," he said. His voice was unsteady. "I cannot be his puppet." Sylvia looked at him. Her eyes were cool. They were judging. "Whose puppet, Mr. Pennington?" "Morrison's." The name was a foul taste in his mouth. "He is the devil himself. He and his syndicate. They have me in a snare. They control my finances. They know things about my past. I have been blackmailed into cooperation. I helped them pressure your father. I helped them ruin Steele. I am ashamed." His confession hung in the air. It was a raw and ugly thing. He had finally chosen a side. He had chosen to be a man again, not a pawn. A slow footstep sounded on the porch behind them. Tate Brady stepped out of the shadows. His face was unreadable. He had heard everything. Sylvia turned on him. Her anger was a hot flame. "And you, Brady? Are you one of his puppets too? Did you try to kill Todd for them? Was that part of their plan?" Brady looked at Pennington. He looked at Sylvia. He sighed. The charming rogue fell away like a mask. The man underneath was harder. He was colder. He was more dangerous. "My name is not Brady. It is Marshall Tate. I work for the United States government." Pennington gasped. Sylvia stared in stunned silence. "I am an undercover marshal," Tate continued. His voice was flat. It was official. "I have been investigating this cattle syndicate for a year. It is a cancer that spreads from here to Kansas City. Morrison is the heart of it in this territory. I did not try to kill Steele. I challenged him to get close to him, to test him. I needed to know if he was part of it, or another victim." The revelation was a thunderclap. It changed everything. Brady the charming scoundrel was gone. In his place stood a lawman, a man hunting the same monster they were. The Apache attack was their work. Morrison used them. He promised them guns and a share of the plunder. He betrayed them, just like he betrays everyone. I needed proof. I needed to see his hand at work. Now I have it. While secrets were being revealed on the porch, a theft was underway. At the rodeo grounds, Swede Larson sat guard outside Tony's stall. His shotgun rested across his lap. He was a loyal guard dog. He was proud of his duty. A man approached him from the darkness. It was one of Pennington's ranch hands. The man offered Swede a bottle. "Long night, friend," the man said with a smile. "Thought you could use a drink to keep warm." Swede was a simple man. He saw no harm in it. He trusted the face of a fellow cowboy. He took the bottle. He drank deeply. The whiskey was strong. It burned a pleasant trail down his throat. He did not taste the drug mixed into it. He thanked the man. The man smiled again and walked away. 5 minutes later, Swede's head felt heavy. The world began to swim. He tried to stand. His legs would not obey him. He slumped against the stall wall. The shotgun slipped from his grasp. His eyes closed. He was lost to the world. The thin man appeared. He was not alone. 2 others were with him. They moved with silent efficiency. They opened the stall door. Tony nickered softly. One of the men calmed him with a gentle hand. They led the magnificent horse out of the stall. They wrapped his hooves in thick cloth to muffle their sound. Tony was stolen the night before the race. The final piece of Morrison's plan clicked into place. An hour passed. The drug began to wear off. Swede stirred. He groaned. His head pounded. He sat up slowly. The world was a blurry mess. He looked at the stall. His mind struggled to catch up. He saw the open door. He saw the empty space where the sorrel horse should have been. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Tony was gone. He had failed. He had failed Todd. He scrambled to his feet. He stumbled. He found his balance. He filled his great lungs with air. He shouted a name into the uncaring night. It was a cry of pure panic. A cry of despair. Todd. Chapter 13. Todd. They took him. Tony is gone. Swede's shout was a raw wound in the night. It tore through the camp. It brought me from my bedroll. It brought Todd from the ruin of his cabin. We ran toward the rodeo grounds. We found Swede standing before an empty stall. His face was a mask of guilt and horror. I fell asleep. Someone gave me a drink. I failed you, Todd. Todd did not look at Swede. He looked at the empty stall. His face was not one of despair. It was cold. It was hard as granite. He knelt. He examined the ground. The earth was disturbed. The tracks of several men were clear. The tracks of a single horse being led away were also clear. Then Todd saw it. A glint of metal half buried in the dirt. He picked it up. It was a spur. It was not a common working spur. It was silver. It had an elaborate design. It was a rich man's spur. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Cliff Pennington. It was planted there. A clumsy attempt to lay a false trail. Pennington did not do this, Todd said. His voice was a low growl. This is Morrison's work. He stood up. He looked out into the vast darkness beyond the camp. He wants my horse. He wants my hope. He will not have it. There was no time to waste. There was no time for anger. There was only the trail. We left Swede to raise the alarm. Todd and I saddled our horses. We rode out into the night. Todd took the lead. He was a master tracker. His eyes read the story in the dirt. He saw things I could not see. A broken twig. A displaced stone. The faint impressions of cloth-wrapped hooves. The thieves were clever. But Todd was better. He was driven by a righteous fire. The chase was a desperate race against time. We rode through canyons like black gashes in the earth. We climbed ridges that overlooked a sleeping world. The trail was faint. But it was there. It led us deep into the Badlands. A place of twisted rock and dead trees. A place where outlaws and ghosts felt at home. After hours of riding, the trail grew stronger. The thieves were getting careless. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. As dawn began to bleed across the eastern sky, Todd pulled his horse to a stop. He pointed. Below us, in a hidden box canyon, was a small abandoned ranch. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from its chimney. It was Morrison's hideout. We dismounted. We approached on foot. Our movements were silent. We were ghosts seeking vengeance. We crept to the edge of the rickety corral. Tony was there. He stood alone, He was unharmed. A wave of relief washed over me. It was followed by a cold wave of dread. This felt too easy. It was a trap. Hands grabbed us from the shadows. Men rose from the ground around us. We were surrounded. We fought back. But there were too many. They overwhelmed us. They disarmed us. They dragged us into the ranch house. Black Jack Morrison sat at a table. He was drinking coffee. He smiled when he saw us. "Good morning, gentlemen. I was expecting you." His eyes were black pits of amusement. His men tied us to chairs. We were captives. "Steele, you are a persistent problem." Morrison took a slow sip of his coffee. "Just like your father." He did not know when to quit either. He leaned forward. He decided to gloat. He revealed his full plan. "Stealing your horse was just for sport. It is a piece of a much larger design. This whole town is a chessboard. I have been moving the pieces for months." He told us everything. He told us about the rustling. He told us about the fires. He told us about using the Apache. It was all designed to create chaos, to create fear, to prepare for his final move. "The rodeo is the perfect cover," he said. His voice was full of arrogant pride. "The whole territory will be watching the races. They will be drunk. They will be distracted. My men will be busy. They will not be watching horses. They will be stealing cattle. Every head from every ranch for 100 miles. The Star Circle. Pennington's herds. Everyone. By sunset tomorrow, the syndicate will own this valley. We will have accomplished a massive cattle theft. And I will be its king." He stood up. He walked over to Todd. He looked down at him. "Your father's gold will be a nice bonus. But the land, the power, that is the real prize. It is a prize you will not live to see." He turned to his men. His voice was cold. "Take them outside. Finish it." They dragged us out into the morning light. They stood us before the wall of the barn. We were about to be executed. I looked at Todd. He showed no fear, only a deep, burning hatred. The outlaws raised their rifles. I braced myself for the impact. A single gunshot cracked from the rocks above the canyon. One of Morrison's men fell. Then another shot. And another. The canyon erupted into a war. Sweet had brought help. He stood on the ridge. With him was Marshal Tate and a posse of a dozen deputized men. They laid down a withering fire on the hideout. Morrison's men were caught completely by surprise. They scrambled for cover. They returned fire. The air was filled with bullets and shouting. In the confusion, Marshal Tate slid down the rock face. He landed near us. He pulled out a knife. He cut our ropes. "Looks like you boys found trouble," he said with a grim smile. I grabbed a pistol from a fallen outlaw beside me. It felt heavy and good in my hand. Todd did the same. He was no longer a captive. He was a fighter again. He turned. He saw one of Morrison's men taking aim at the marshal. He raised his new pistol. He fired. Chapter 14. Morrison. "This is United States Marshal Tate. You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons." Tate's voice was a thunderclap in the canyon. It boomed with an authority that shocked every man there. Outlaw and ally alike. Todd stared at the man he knew as Brady. The charming rogue was gone. A federal lawman stood in his place. The revelation hit Todd with the force of a physical blow. The world had turned upside down again. The gunfight raged. It was a desperate, chaotic symphony of violence. Morrison's men were trapped. They were caught between our guns in the ranch house and the posse's fire from the rocks above. The fight was brutal, but it was short. The outlaws were outmatched. They were outmaneuvered. One by one, they threw down their guns. They raised their hands in surrender. The law had finally come to the Badlands. But Black Jack Morrison was a wolf. He was not a sheep to be herded into a pen. In the final moments of the fight, he made his move. He kicked over a lantern in the barn. The dry hay exploded into a wall of flame. The smoke and fire created a perfect screen. In the confusion, Morrison slipped out a back door. He ran to a small, hidden corral. A single black horse was waiting there. Todd saw him. "Morrison," he roared. He raised his rifle to fire. But a burning beam from the barn collapsed in front of him. It blocked his path. By the time he scrambled over it, Morrison was on his horse. He was galloping away. He disappeared into the labyrinth of canyons. Morrison had escaped. The fire died down. The smoke cleared. The aftermath was a scene of grim victory. Marshal Tate stood over the captured outlaws. His men were tying their hands. The mass arrests of the syndicate's foot soldiers had begun. Tate walked over to Todd. He looked at the younger man's face. He saw the fury. He saw the frustration. "He is gone," Todd said. The words were flat. They were stones in his mouth. "He is," Tate agreed. "But we have his army. We have witnesses. We have proof. We will hunt him down. I give you my word." He looked at Todd. He looked at the posse. "My real mission was to dismantle this syndicate. You have all helped me do that today. You are all heroes." The words felt hollow to Todd. The man who murdered his father was free. Justice felt a long way off. We brought the prisoners back to Rodondo. The town was in an uproar. The news spread like a prairie fire. The rodeo was set to begin the next day. The greatest contest in the territory. But Todd's mind was not on the race. He stood by the corral that evening. His horse Tony was safe. Swede was fussing over him, brushing his coat until it shone like copper. The $1,000 prize money was still a possibility. It was the only way to save his ranch. The only way to rebuild. But Morrison was out there. He was riding free. Todd had to choose. He could go after Morrison. He could hunt him down. He could get the vengeance he craved. But he would have to abandon the race. He would lose his ranch. He would lose everything he had fought for. Or he could compete in the race. He could win the money. He could save his home. But he would have to let Morrison go. He would have to trust the law. He would have to live with the ghost of his father. He was caught in an impossible trap. Go after Morrison, or compete in the race to save his ranch. A soft footstep approached him. It was Sylvia. She had heard the news. She had ridden straight to him. She stood beside him at the corral fence. She looked at Tony. Then she looked at Todd. She saw the war in his eyes. "He is a beautiful horse," she said quietly. "He could win the race. That money would solve all your problems." Todd nodded. He did not look at her. It would. Sylvia reached out. She placed her hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but it carried a great weight. "A ranch is just land, Todd. A home is just wood and nails. They can be replaced. Money can be won or lost." She paused. Her eyes were clear and steady. She made her feelings clear. A man's honor cannot be replaced. Once it is gone forever. I value honor over money. She did not tell him what to do. She did not need to. Her words were a key. They unlocked the trap he was in. He looked at her. He saw the respect in her eyes. It was worth more than all the gold in his father's mine. It was worth more than any ranch. He finally understood. He turned from her. He looked past the lights of the town. He looked toward the dark, silent hills where Morrison had fled. The need for vengeance still burned in him. But it was a different fire now. It was a patient fire. He then looked back at Tony. The horse was the finest animal he had ever seen. A true champion. Todd walked toward the horse. His steps were sure. They were the steps of a man who had made his choice. He ran a hand along Tony's powerful neck. The horse nickered softly. Todd felt the strength in the animal. He felt his own strength return. He would race. Not for the money. Not for the ranch. He would race for his honor. He would show the whole world that Todd Steele could not be broken. Chapter 15. He has my men. He has the law on his side. He thinks he has won. Blackjack Morrison's voice was a blade scraping against stone. He stood in a dusty lined shack miles from anywhere. His empire had crumbled. His army was gone. Only a handful of loyal men remained. His face was a mask of cold fury. The boy is a fool. The game is not over. I still have one card to play. The game moved to the Star Circle Ranch. Night had fallen. The house was quiet. Star Circle, Bob Donnell sat in his study. The wound he received in the Apache raid ached. He was reading a letter by the light of a single lamp. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. He looked up. Morrison stood in the doorway. He was a black specter of violence. Two of his men stood behind him. Star Circle, Bob reached for the pistol on his desk. He was old. He was injured. But he was not a coward. Get out of my house, Morrison. Morrison laughed. A dry, rasping sound. I am not here for you, old man. I am here for the girl. As if on cue, Sylvia appeared in the hall behind them. Her eyes went wide. She saw the danger. She did not scream. She stood her ground. I will not let you touch him. Morrison's men moved toward her. Star Circle Bob fired his pistol. The shot went wide. One of Morrison's men returned fire. The bullet hit Bob in the shoulder. He slumped over the desk. He was wounded, trying to protect his daughter too. Sylvia cried out his name. She ran to his side. The second man grabbed her. She fought him with a wild fury. But she was overpowered. They dragged her from the room. She is my leverage, Morrison said to the wounded man on the floor 3. A message will be sent to Steele. He will bring me the map to the mine. Or his pretty prairie rose dies. Morrison kidnapped Sylvia. His plan was cruel. It was simple. He would force Todd to reveal the mine's location. A lone rider from the Star Circle brought the news to Rodondo. He found us at the rodeo grounds. Todd was making his final preparations for the race. The rider was frantic. His words tumbled out. Kidnapping. Star Circle Bob shot. A note for Steele. The note was from Morrison. Its demands were clear. Todd was to come alone to a place called Widow's Peak. He was to bring the map. He was to be there by noon tomorrow. The same time as the championship race. If he was late, Sylvia would be killed. If he brought the law, Sylvia would be killed. Todd stood there with the note in his hand. He was caught in a new impossible choice. His world had shrunk to two paths. Each one led to a different kind of hell. He could go to Widow's Peak. He could save Sylvia. But he would lose the mine. He would lose his father's legacy. He would miss the race. The syndicate would foreclose on his ranch. He would lose everything. Or he could ride in the race. He could win the money. He could save his ranch. But Sylvia would die. He would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his life. He had to choose. Save Sylvia or save his ranch. 5. He looked utterly broken. The weight of the choice was crushing him. He looked at me. His eyes were a plea for an answer that did not exist. "There is no way," he whispered. "There is no way to do both." "Perhaps there is." My own voice surprised me. An idea was forming in my mind. It was a desperate idea. It was a dangerous idea. But it was a chance. I convinced him there might be a way to do both. 6. Morrison wants the map. He does not know we have a U.S. Marshal on our side. A Marshal who now has a personal stake in this. I laid out the plan. It was a gamble. A long shot. But it was better than surrendering. Marshal Tate wants Morrison. More than anything. He will not let Sylvia die. We give the real map to Tate. Let him and his posse go to Widow's Peak. They know the terrain. They are fighters. They can surround the place. They can rescue Sylvia and capture Morrison at the same time. Todd listened. A flicker of hope returned to his eyes. And me. "You must ride," I said. My voice was firm. "You must ride in that race. Winning is no longer about the money. It is a message. It is a declaration of war. You will show Morrison. You will show the syndicate. You will show this whole territory that you cannot be beaten. You will win the race. Tate will get the man. We can do both. We have to." The fire in his eyes grew brighter. The choice was still there. But it was no longer a choice between two losses. It was a choice between two victories. He made his decision. He walked over to Marshal Tate. He handed him the worn sheepskin map. The true location of his father's gold. "Bring them home," Todd said. Tate nodded grimly. "I will." Todd then turned. He did not look back. He walked toward the stall where Tony waited. His stride was long. It was purposeful. He was a man with a desperate plan. He was a man ready to fight on two fronts. Chapter 16. And now, folks, the moment you have all been waiting for. The final event. The Rodondo Rodeo Championship Race. The announcer's voice echoed across the crowded grounds. A great roar went up from the grandstands. The air was electric. Every eye was on the starting line. The finest horses in the territory were there. They were sleek. They were powerful. Their coats shone in the afternoon sun. Among them stood Tony. Todd Steele sat on his back. Todd's face was a stone mask. His mind was on Sylvia. His mind was on Marshal Tate's posse moving in on Widow's Peak. But his body was here. He was ready to ride. Then chaos erupted. In the crush of horses and men near the line, a figure darted out. It was the thin man. The saboteur. He had escaped the raid on Morrison's hideout. He held a long knife. He lunged toward Tony. He was not aiming for Todd. He was aiming for the horse. He slashed the knife across Tony's foreleg. A deep and terrible cut. The horse screamed. A sound of pain and terror. He reared up. Todd fought to control him. Blood poured from the wound. Tony was lame. He could not race. The thin man vanished back into the crowd. It was a final act of spite. A final piece of Morrison's poison. Todd stared at his horse's ruined leg. Despair was a cold hand gripping his heart. His plan was destroyed. Everything was lost. The race officials told him to clear the track. His horse was disqualified. He did not move for a long moment. Then a new fire lit in his eyes. A stubborn, defiant fire. He would not quit. He would not give them the satisfaction. He dismounted from Tony. He handed the reins to a stunned Swede. "Take care of him," he said. He ran from the starting line. He ran to the livery pens. The crowd began to murmur. They wondered what he was doing. A few minutes later, he returned. He was leading another horse. It was his old horse. The raw-boned mare with a coat the color of dried mud. The horse he had ridden into town on. She was tired. She was caked with dust. She was not a racehorse. She was a symbol of his poverty. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. The people pointed. They mocked him. They pitied him. The crowd's reaction to Todd's broken-down mount was brutal. Old Grundy, the bookmaker, publicly erased Todd's name from his board. He declared him a non-contender. The other racers looked at Todd with contempt. He had dishonored their race with this nag. Todd ignored them all. He saddled the old mare. He climbed onto her back. He rode her to the starting line. He was a man against the world. He was riding against all odds. High in the stands, 2 men watched him. They were Morrison's men. They had rifles hidden under long coats. Their faces were grim. Their orders were clear. If Todd Steele somehow managed to win, they were to shoot him from the crowd. His victory would be his death sentence. Miles away, Sylvia Donnell was not waiting for a rescue. She was a prisoner in a small cabin at Widow's Peak. But she was a fighter. She watched her 2 guards. They were lazy. They were overconfident. They thought she was a helpless girl. They were wrong. She saw her chance. One of the guards was drinking whiskey. The other was cleaning his rifle. He had laid his pistol on the table. Sylvia moved like a cat. She kicked the table over. The pistol clattered to the floor. The whiskey-drinking guard was startled. He fumbled for his own gun. Sylvia was faster. She scooped up the fallen pistol. She fired. The shot was loud in the small cabin. The guard cried out. He clutched his arm. The other guard raised his rifle. But Sylvia was already moving. She darted out the door. She ran for the horses. She managed to escape. 7. She swung onto the back of the fastest-looking horse. She dug her heels into its flanks. She rode like the wind. She was not just fleeing. She was racing back to warn Todd. 8. She had overheard her guards talking. They had laughed about the men in the crowd. They had laughed about the order to kill Todd if he won. She knew he was riding into a deadly trap. 2 races had begun. One for a purse of gold in Rodondo. One for a man's life across the open prairie. In Rodondo, the announcer raised his pistol to the sky. He was ready to start the race. Todd leaned forward on his old mare. His knuckles were white. He braced himself. The starting gun fired. Sylvia spurred her horse harder. It leapt forward into a desperate gallop. Chapter 17. He is falling behind. The fool on the plow horse is already beaten. A man in the grandstand shouted the words. He was right. The race had begun, in a furious explosion of dust and sound. The sleek racehorses leapt forward. They were a wave of pure speed and power. Todd Steele and his old mare were swallowed by the wave. They were left behind, in the churning dirt. The gap between them and the pack grew with every thundering hoofbeat. The race was a brutal affair. It was not a contest of gentlemen. It was a war on horseback. Riders used their whips on each other. They cut each other off with vicious precision. A man was thrown from his horse when another rider deliberately collided with him. Sabotage attempts were happening against all the riders too. The air was thick with cheating and desperation. It was a race for survival, not just victory. Ahead of Todd, two riders were locked in a fierce battle. It was Cliff Pennington and Marshall Tate. They shouted at each other. They cursed each other. Their old rivalry had seemingly exploded anew. Tate rode his horse into Pennington's. He forced him toward the outside rail. Pennington fought back. He lashed out with his riding crop. To the crowd, it was a spectacle of hatred. But I knew what it was. I saw the truth in their eyes. It was Pennington and Brady's staged fight 3. They were not trying to win. They were trying to clear a path. Their fight was a piece of theater designed to eliminate each other and help Todd 4. Their chaotic battle took out two other riders. A lane began to open up. A sliver of hope in the chaos. But Todd was still too far behind. His old mare did not have the speed. Then a new figure appeared. On a high ridge overlooking the rodeo grounds. A lone rider on a black horse. He sat motionless against the sky. It was Black Jack Morrison. He had returned. He was not alone. A handful of hard men were with him. His last few loyalists. He had come to collect the mine location by force. He believed Todd had tricked him. He was here for his final revenge. Morrison raised his hand. It was a signal. High in the grandstands, the two men I had seen before stood up. They threw off their long coats. They held rifles. They were Morrison's assassins. A gunfight erupted in the grandstands during the race 5. The first shot was deafening. A man standing near me cried out. He fell backward. Panic swept through the crowd. People screamed. They scrambled for cover. It was a stampede of terror. Swede Larson roared. He charged toward one of the riflemen. He was a great bear of a man, filled with righteous fury. He had no weapon. He was pure force. Other townspeople began to fight back. They threw bottles. They overturned benches to create cover. The rodeo had become a battlefield. Down on the track, the racers heard the shots. They did not know what was happening. They faltered. Some pulled their horses up. Others spurred them on faster. They wanted to escape the unseen danger. The chaos created openings. Todd saw his chance. He urged the old mare forward. He began to weave through the confused riders. He was no longer just a racer. He was a man moving through a war zone. His mare had no great speed. But she had heart. She had stamina. She did not panic. She responded to his commands. They began to gain ground. They passed one rider. Then another. The laughter of the crowd was a distant memory. The mockery was forgotten. Now there was only the thunder of hooves, the crack of rifles, the screams of the crowd. Todd looked up at the ridge. He saw Morrison clearly now. He saw the cold hatred on his face. He understood. This was the final trap. The race was the bait. The chaos was the snare. Morrison did not care who won. He was here to burn the whole world down. The old mare was tiring. Her breath came in ragged gasps. But she did not stop. She kept running. Todd leaned low over her neck. He whispered to her. He urged her on. They were no longer just horse and rider. They were partners in a desperate struggle. They were a single heartbeat. A single will. Todd steered her toward the inside track. He was aiming for the final turn. He urged his tired horse onward. He was riding toward the finish line. He was riding toward the man on the ridge. Chapter 18. Stop him now. He does not cross that line. Morrison's roar was a raw tear in the fabric of the sky. His command spurred his last two mounted men into action. They plunged their horses down the rocky slope of the ridge. They were a torrent of malice descending onto the track. The championship race devolved into a desperate hunt. A bullet sang past Todd's ear. He felt the hornet's kiss of its passage. He flattened himself against his old mare's neck. Her sweat and dust filled his nostrils. Easy, girl, he whispered into her ear. Just run. Run like the devil is behind us. The mare ran. Her stride was not the elegant, floating gait of a racehorse. It was a jarring, earth-eating run. The run of an animal that knew only survival. Another shot splintered the wooden rail beside Todd's knee. The outlaws were flanking him. They were trying to force him into the rail. To crush him. One of the riders pulled alongside. He was a hard-faced man with a jagged scar on his cheek. He reached out a grimy hand. He tried to grab the mare's bridle. Todd reacted without thinking. He swung his leg out. The heel of his boot connected solidly with the man's forearm. The man howled in pain. He dropped his reins. His horse shied away violently. The other outlaw cursed. He fired again. But Todd had used the moment. He urged the mare to the inside. He put a panicked, riderless racehorse between himself and the gunman. The bullet meant for him struck the other horse instead. The animal went down in a terrible, screaming heap. This was the epic chase scene. Todd had to complete the race while being pursued by Morrison's men. Every yard was a battle. Every breath was a victory. High in the grandstands, the second battle raged. The sniper's rifle cracked with chilling regularity. He had Swede and me pinned. We were trapped behind a flimsy wagon. Wood chips flew every time a bullet hit our cover. We were helpless. Then a rider appeared. A vision of dust and fury. It was Sylvia. She galloped her horse through the panicked crowd. She leapt from the saddle while the horse was still moving. She hit the ground running. She did not scream. Her face was a beautiful mask of cold rage. She slid in behind the wagon with us. Doc. Swede, she yelled over the din. Where is he? I pointed toward the top of the stands. Up there. He has us pinned. Not anymore. Sylvia rested her captured pistol on the edge of the wagon. Her hands were steady. She took a breath. She rose up and fired twice. Her shots were a signal. A declaration that a new player had joined the fight. The sniper's return fire was immediate. A bullet tore through the canvas cover of the wagon. It passed just over her head. She did not flinch. Swede, she commanded. When I fire again, make some noise. Draw his attention. Sylvia fired again. At the same moment, Swede stood to his full height. He let out a roar that shook the very timbers of the stand. He hurled a broken piece of bench toward the sniper's nest. The wood fell short. But it worked. The sniper was distracted for a half second. It was all I needed. I took aim with my own pistol. I fired. A cry of pain came from the sniper's position. His rifle clattered down onto the seats below. Sylvia had arrived and joined the fight alongside Doc and the townspeople. Down on the track, the last mile stretched before Todd. It was an eternity. His pursuers were still behind him, but they were wary now. His stubborn refusal to fall had unnerved them, and ahead of him there was only the finish line. The old mare proved her worth in the final stretch. Her sides were heaving. Her breath was a storm, but her legs kept moving. Her heart kept pumping. She was a simple ranch horse. She was used to long days. She was used to hard work. The thoroughbreds were built for speed. They had long since panicked or exhausted themselves. But this old mare was built for endurance. She was built for a fight like this. The crowd saw it. They felt it. Their fear was turning into something else. Ah! They began to cheer for the dusty man on the tired horse. They roared his name. Steele! 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 The finish line was 100 yards away. Then 50. Todd could see the judge standing there. His hand was raised. Victory was there. He could taste it. Morrison saw it too. From his perch on the ridge, he saw his men failing. He saw the sniper go silent. He saw Todd about to cross the finish line. He saw his perfect plan turning to ash in his mouth. Rage consumed him. "I will do it myself," he snarled. He spurred his magnificent black stallion. The horse plunged down the steep slope. It was a controlled avalanche of muscle and fury. He hit the track at a full gallop. He was not aiming for Todd's back. He was aiming for the space just in front of him. Todd heard the new thunder of hooves. He looked to his side. He saw Morrison, a black devil coming to claim his soul. Todd urged the mare on. "Faster, girl. Just a little more." But the stallion was too fast. Its power was too great. Morrison cut him off. He yanked his horse to a skidding, theatrical stop. The stallion reared. Its hooves pawed at the sky. Its shadow fell over Todd. Morrison had cornered Todd just before the finish line. The race was stopped. The crowd's roar died in their throats. The world held its breath. Chapter 19. The race is over, boy. Your life is over. Blackjack Morrison's voice was a funeral bell. He sat upon his black stallion. He was a king on a throne of darkness. He blocked the path to the finish line. Todd and his tired mare stood before him. They were David before Goliath. The sun was a fiery wound in the western sky. It bled light across the scene. The showdown at sunset had begun. The crowd was a silent beast. They held their breath. The gunfight in the stands had ended. Sylvia and Swede and I had won. But this was a different fight. This was a battle for a man's soul. This was the final confrontation between Todd and Morrison. "You have your father's eyes," Morrison sneered. He swung down from his horse. His movements were fluid. They were confident. He had that same stupid look on his face. "Right before I killed him." Todd dismounted. He stood on shaky legs. The long race had drained him. His face was a mask of grief and fury. "You will pay for what you did." Morrison laughed. It was a cold, empty sound. He wanted to hurt Todd. He wanted to break him before he killed him. "He begged me, you know. He begged for his life. He said he had a son. He said your name. He cried like a baby." Morrison revealed more details about Todd's father's death. Every word was a hammer blow. I told him you would be better off without a weakling for a father. Then I smashed his skull with a rock. The same rock that held all his precious gold. Something inside Todd snapped. The grief turned to white-hot rage. He did not say a word. He drew his pistol. Morrison was faster. Much faster. The epic gunfight began. It was not a clean duel. It was a brawl with bullets. Morrison's first shot tore through the flesh of Todd's left arm. Todd cried out. He stumbled back. He fired wildly. His shot kicked up dirt at Morrison's feet. Morrison seemed to have the advantage. Todd scrambled for cover. He dove behind a set of barrels near the track. Morrison advanced slowly. He was enjoying this. He was a cat playing with a wounded mouse. You are slow, Steele. Slow like your father. He was a dreamer. I am a realist. I take what I want. Morrison fired again. The bullet splintered the barrel near Todd's head. Todd was trapped. He was wounded. His vision was starting to blur. He knew he could not win a straight fight. Give me the map, boy, Morrison taunted. He was closer now. Give me the map, and I will make your death quick. Todd clutched his wounded arm. He glared from behind the barrel. The map is with the law. You will never get it. Morrison stopped. He threw his head back and laughed. A long and terrible sound. The map. You fool. You risked everything for a piece of paper. A paper I drew myself. Todd stared. He did not understand. The map was a fake, Morrison roared. A decoy. I made it in case anyone ever found my partner's body. It points to nothing. Just a hole in the ground. Your father's real secret was never on a piece of paper. You have been chasing a ghost. The world seemed to tilt under Todd's feet. Everything he had done. Everything he had sacrificed. It was for a lie. What do you mean? Todd's voice was a hoarse whisper. Your father was a clever man, Morrison said. His voice was full of mock admiration. Too clever for his own good. He found the gold. But he knew men like me would try to steal it. So he never staked a claim. He never drew a real map. He hid his treasure in plain sight. Morrison raised his pistol. He aimed it at Todd's head. He was ready for the killing shot. The truth about the gold mine's location is this, boy. There is no mine. The words made no sense. No mine. No. Morrison's smile was triumphant. He was savoring his final victory. Henry Steele's gold was never in a mountain. It was in the water. It is placer gold. It washes down from the high peaks every spring. It settles in the creek bed. The same creek that runs through your pathetic little ranch. The same creek that waters Star Circle Bob's vast herds. The gold is not in one place. It is everywhere. The land itself is the treasure. And now it is all mine. The revelation was a bolt of lightning. It reframed everything. The land grab was not about cattle. It was about the gold hidden in the soil. The water rights were the rights to a fortune. Todd looked down at the ground beneath him. The dusty soil of the racetrack. He thought of his creek. He thought of the endless struggle for water. It was never about water. It was about gold. Morrison laughed again. He thought he had broken Todd completely. He thought he had won. Todd looked up from the ground. He looked at Morrison. The pain was still in his eyes. The grief was still there. But the confusion was gone. It was replaced by a new light. A sharp and sudden understanding. It was the look of a man who had just been given the one weapon he needed to win. Chapter 20. What is the matter, boy? Did the truth finally shut you up? Morrison's voice was slick with triumph. He stood over Todd with his pistol leveled. He was certain he had shattered Todd's spirit. He mistook the silence for defeat. It was not defeat. It was the cold calm of a gathering storm. Todd finally understood. He was not fighting for a ghost's treasure. He was fighting for the dirt under his boots. He was fighting for the water in his creek. He was fighting for his home. With a sudden roar, Todd kicked his leg out. He did not aim for Morrison's body. He aimed for the loose dirt of the racetrack. A cloud of grit and dust flew up. It shot directly into Morrison's eyes. Morrison bellowed in surprised pain. He stumbled back a step. His gun hand wavered. He was blind. It was the only opening Todd would get. He charged forward. He ignored the fire in his wounded arm. He slammed his body into Morrison's midsection. The two men crashed to the ground. Morrison's pistol flew from his hand. It skidded away into the dust. The fight for the valley became a desperate struggle in the dirt. Morrison was a bull of a man. His fists were like hammers. He landed a brutal blow to Todd's ribs. Todd gasped for air. Pain exploded in his chest. But Todd was fueled by 2 decades of a stolen legacy. He fought with a wild and righteous fury. He was a cornered animal. He landed a punch that split Morrison's lip. He felt the man's teeth cut his knuckles. Blood was on his hands. His father's blood. Now his enemies. They rolled over and over. A whirlwind of dust and sweat and hatred. Morrison's greater weight began to tell. He pinned Todd beneath him. His thick fingers closed around Todd's throat. Todd's vision began to swim. Black spots danced before his eyes. His hands scrabbled in the dirt. It closed around a heavy, sharp-edged rock. The same kind of rock Morrison had used on his father. With the last of his strength, Todd swung his arm. He smashed the rock against the side of Morrison's head. Morrison grunted. The pressure on Todd's throat loosened. Todd slammed the rock down again. Morrison rolled off him. He was dazed. He was bleeding. Todd scrambled on top of him. He raised the rock high. He was ready to finish it. He looked down at the bloody face of his father's killer. He saw the terror in the man's eyes. He saw his own reflection. He saw the face of a killer. And he knew he was not that man. He let the rock fall. Todd had defeated Morrison in combat. 1. He pushed himself to his feet. Every muscle ached. His arm was a useless burning weight. He turned his back on the groaning man in the dirt. He looked toward the finish line. It waited for him. A silent promise. He limped to his old mare. The horse stood patiently. She had not run. She had waited for her rider. He painfully pulled himself into the saddle. He nudged her forward. The crowd watched in absolute silence. They watched the wounded man on the exhausted horse. They watched him approach the finish line. He crossed it. A single flag went up. The race concluded with Todd's victory. Then the silence broke. A roar washed over him. It was the sound of 1,000 people cheering for a miracle. Marshal Tate and a dozen men rode onto the track. Sylvia was with them. She rode like an avenging angel. They surrounded the fallen Morrison. Tate dismounted and knelt beside him. "It's over, Morrison." Morrison coughed. A bloody froth appeared on his lips. "You think so, Marshal? You think this ends with me?" He laughed a ragged, painful laugh. "The syndicate has 1,000 arms. They will." A rider galloped onto the track. He handed a telegram to Tate. The marshal read it. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. He looked down at Morrison. "It seems your 1,000 arms just got cut off." He read from the paper. "Syndicate headquarters in Kansas City raided by federal agents. All board members arrested. Financial records seized. Warrants issued in 3 states." He crumpled the paper. "The cattle syndicate is rounded up by federal marshals." 3. The last bit of fight went out of Morrison's eyes. He was truly beaten. He was a king with no kingdom. He looked at Todd. His final words were filled with venom. "Your father, he was a fool. He trusted me." Morrison's dying confession began. 4. He wanted to build a community. A town where everyone shared the wealth from the creek. Can you imagine? Sharing. "I showed him what the world is really like." He coughed again. A final shudder ran through his body. He was dead. The rodeo officials walked toward Todd. One of them carried a heavy leather sack. The prize money. He held it out. "You won this, Mr. Steele. Fair and square." Todd looked at the bag of gold. It was the solution to all his problems. But it was not what he wanted. He looked past the official. He saw Sylvia. She had dismounted. She was walking toward him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Her face was filled with a love that was worth more than all the placer gold in the world. He looked at the bag of money. He looked at the woman he loved. He made his choice. He turned his back on the official and the gold. He took a painful step toward Sylvia. He closed the distance between them. Chapter 21. In the matter of the United States versus these men, how do you find the defendants? The judge's voice was a dry rattle of stones. It filled the silence of the crowded courtroom. The air was thick with the smell of dust and sweat and anxious anticipation. A month had passed since the rodeo. A month of healing. A month of waiting. Now, it was a time for judgment. The trials and justice for the syndicate members had begun. 1. The jury foreman stood. He was a small rancher, a man who had lost kin in the Apache raid. He looked at the dozen captured outlaws in the dock. Their faces were pale. Their arrogance was gone. It was replaced by a rat-like fear. "On all counts, Your Honor, we find them guilty." A wave of sound washed over the courtroom. Not a cheer. It was a deep sigh of collective relief. Justice was a rare commodity in the territories. But today, it had come to Rodondo. The judge banged his gavel. He sentenced the men to hang. Their story was over. But the story of the syndicate was not. The biggest trial came next. The trial of the men behind the men. The ones who used money and influence as their weapons. The key witness took the stand. It was Cliff Pennington. He was a different man. His expensive suits were gone. He wore the simple clothes of a homesteader. His face was leaner. The puffiness of wealth and whiskey was gone. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the federal prosecutor. He was ready to pay his debt. Pennington's redemption was at hand, as he prepared to testify against his former associates too. His voice was clear. It was steady. He told them everything. He spoke of the syndicate's plan. He spoke of Morrison's cruelty. He spoke of the blackmail that had trapped him. He did not make excuses for himself. He confessed his own cowardice, his own greed. "I was a pawn," he said. His gaze found Sylvia in the crowd. I was a fool. I chose money over honor. I will not make that mistake again. His testimony was a hammer. It shattered the syndicate's wall of lies. It sealed the fate of men in Kansas City and St. Louis. Men who thought they were untouchable. When he stepped down from the stand, he was a free man. Not in the eyes of the law, perhaps, but in his own soul. After the trials, the town had another piece of business. The old sheriff had retired. He was a good man. But the violence had been too much for him. Star Circle Bob and I, and 2 other town leaders met with Marshal Tate. We met in the sheriff's office. The office that was now empty. The town needs a lawman, Star Circle Bob said. His arm was still in a sling, but his voice was strong again. We need a man who is not afraid. We need a man who knows this town. We want you to stay, Tate. We want you to be our permanent sheriff. Tate looked around the small, dusty office. He was a U.S. Marshal, a man used to hunting men across 1,000 miles of prairie. He was not a man who stayed in one place, but his gaze drifted to the window. He looked out at the schoolhouse across the street. The schoolteacher was just leaving for the day. He had been talking to her quite a bit since the trials began. A small smile touched his lips. The syndicate is broken, he said. My mission here is over. But my work is not. He looked back at us. He made his decision. I accept. I will stay in Rodondo as the permanent sheriff. 3. A new kind of law had come to town. A law with a steady hand and a clear eye. My own business was with Todd. I went with him to the bank. It was a new day for the bank, too. Banker Josephs was gone. His role in the conspiracy had sent him to a federal prison. A new manager was in place. A man sent from back east to sort out the mess. Todd stood before him. He placed the heavy sack of prize money on the desk. I am here to pay my debts, he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of his long struggle. He collected his prize money and began the process to pay off his debts. The banker counted the gold. He consulted his ledgers. The ledgers that had been a weapon against Todd for so long. The banker made his calculations. He stamped a piece of paper, not with a mark of denial, but with a mark of payment, paid in full. He handed the paper to Todd. It was the deed to his ranch. It was free and clear. His name was no longer a mark of debt. It was a mark of ownership. Todd took the deed. He held it in his hands. He felt its weight. It was heavier than any bag of gold. He had bought it with blood, with sweat, with the heart of a horse and the love of his friends. He folded the paper carefully. He placed it in his pocket. He did not say a word. He just nodded to the banker. He turned and walked out of the bank. He stepped into the afternoon sun. He looked up the street. He looked toward the distant hills. His hills. His ranch. A smile finally touched his lips. It was not a grin of victory. It was a quiet smile of peace. He had come home. Chapter 22. There's one more ghost to face. One more debt to pay. Todd spoke the words softly. He and Sylvia stood on the hill overlooking his ranch. The land was his now, free and clear. The scars of the fire remained on the land, a dark patch where his cabin used to be. But the scars on his soul were beginning to heal. Sylvia's hand was in his. It was an anchor in a world that had finally stopped spinning. Your father's ghost, she asked. He nodded. And his gold. They did not go to the dark hole in the mountain. That was Morrison's tomb, not his father's. They walked down to the creek. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. It was the lifeblood of this land. It was the source of all the greed, all the violence, and all the hope. Todd and Sylvia would explore his father's mine together. But the mine was not a place. It was this stream, this water, this land. Todd carried an old prospector's pan. He knelt at the water's edge. He scooped a panful of sand and gravel from the creek bed. He showed Sylvia how to move the pan. A gentle, rocking motion. A slow washing away of the lighter material. He worked with a quiet concentration. His hands moved with an inherited grace. Slowly, the dark sand washed away. In the bottom of the pan, a few bright flakes remained. They caught the sun. They glittered with a pure and honest light. It was gold. It was real. Sylvia gasped. It was beautiful. This is what he found, Todd said. This is what Morrison killed him for. He swirled the water. He let the gold flakes wash back into the creek. You are putting it back? Sylvia asked. She was surprised. It will be here tomorrow, he said. It will be here 100 years from now. The mountain is generous. They walked further up the creek. They followed its winding path into a grove of old cottonwood trees. It was a peaceful place. A quiet cathedral of nature. Under the roots of the largest tree, something was hidden. A small iron lockbox. It was rusted. It was nearly consumed by the earth. Todd's father must have put it there years ago. Todd worked the lock. It was stiff with age. But it finally gave way. He opened the lid. There was no gold inside. There were no coins. There was only a single oilskin pouch. Inside it was a leather-bound journal. It was his father's journal. Here was the evidence of his father's real dream. It was not a dream of wealth. It was a dream of building a better community. Todd opened the journal. The pages were filled with his father's neat handwriting. He began to read aloud to Sylvia. The words were a window into his father's soul. He did not write of riches. He wrote of plans. October 10th. The placer signs are strong. The wealth in this creek could build a kingdom. But a kingdom for one man is a prison. A kingdom for many is a home. He turned the page. There was a detailed sketch of a schoolhouse. It had big windows to let in the light. There was a plan for a new church. There was a design for an irrigation system. A system that would share the creek's water with all the ranches in the valley. Not just his own. He read another entry. Met the Donnell family today. Good people. Strong people. Their little girl Sylvia has fire in her eyes. The Miller family is struggling. Their soil is poor. When the time is right, I will help them. We must all lift each other up. Todd's voice choked with emotion. He finally understood his father. He was not just a prospector. He was a builder. A dreamer. The gold was not the treasure. It was just the tool. The tool to build a community. The tool to create a legacy of kindness. Not power. He looked at Sylvia. Her eyes were shining with tears. He was a good man, she whispered. A great man. Todd knew what he had to do. The decision came to him as easy as breathing. This gold, he said. It is not mine. It belongs to the valley. It belongs to his dream. They made the decision to use the gold to help other struggling ranchers. They would finish what Henry Steele had started. I watched them from the hill above. I had seen so much change in this valley. I saw Pennington in town. He was working with his hands for the first time in his life. He was helping rebuild what he had helped destroy. He was finding a new kind of wealth. I saw Marshall Tate. He walked with a new purpose. He was not just a hunter anymore. He was a guardian. He was planting roots. I reflected on the changes in everyone. The West was a hard land. It could break a man. It could turn him into a monster like Morrison. Or it could forge him into something strong. Something noble, like Todd Steele. He had faced the darkness. He had won. He had found not just gold. He had found his father's glory. He had found his own. I watched as Todd and Sylvia stood. They held hands. They looked at the creek for a long moment. Then they turned. They walked away from the water. They walked toward the charred foundation of the old cabin. They were not looking at a ruin. They were looking at a space to build something new. Together. Chapter 23. There's one more ghost to face. One more debt to pay. Todd spoke the words softly. He and Sylvia stood on the hill overlooking his ranch. The land was his now. Free and clear. The scars of the fire remained on the land. A dark patch where his cabin used to be. But the scars on his soul were beginning to heal. Sylvia's hand was in his. It was an anchor in a world that had finally stopped spinning. Your father's ghost, she asked. He nodded. And his gold. They did not go to the dark hole in the mountain. That was Morrison's tomb, not his father's. They walked down to the creek. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. It was the lifeblood of this land. It was the source of all the greed, all the violence, and all the hope. Todd and Sylvia would explore his father's mine together. But the mine was not a place. It was this stream, this water, this land. Todd carried an old prospector's pan. He knelt at the water's edge. He scooped a panful of sand and gravel from the creek bed. He showed Sylvia how to move the pan. A gentle, rocking motion. A slow washing away of the lighter material. He worked with a quiet concentration. His hands moved with an inherited grace. Slowly, the dark sand washed away. In the bottom of the pan, a few bright flakes remained. They caught the sun. They glittered with a pure and honest light. It was gold. It was real. Sylvia gasped. It was beautiful. This is what he found, Todd said. This is what Morrison killed him for. He swirled the water. He let the gold flakes wash back into the creek. You are putting it back? Sylvia asked. She was surprised. It will be here tomorrow, he said. It will be here 100 years from now. The mountain is generous. They walked further up the creek. They followed its winding path into a grove of old cottonwood trees. It was a peaceful place. A quiet cathedral of nature. Under the roots of the largest tree, something was hidden. A small iron lockbox. It was rusted. It was nearly consumed by the earth. Todd's father must have put it there years ago. Todd worked the lock. It was stiff with age. But it finally gave way. He opened the lid. There was no gold inside. There were no coins. There was only a single oilskin pouch. Inside it was a leather-bound journal. It was his father's journal. Here was the evidence of his father's real dream. It was not a dream of wealth. It was a dream of building a better community. Todd opened the journal. The pages were filled with his father's neat handwriting. He began to read aloud to Sylvia. The words were a window into his father's soul. He did not write of riches. He wrote of plans. October 10th. The placer signs are strong. The wealth in this creek could build a kingdom. But a kingdom for one man is a prison. A kingdom for many is a home. He turned the page. There was a detailed sketch of a schoolhouse. It had big windows to let in the light. There was a plan for a new church. There was a design for an irrigation system. A system that would share the creek's water with all the ranches in the valley, not just his own. He read another entry. Met the Donnell family today. Good people. Strong people. Their little girl Sylvia has fire in her eyes. The Miller family is struggling. Their soil is poor. When the time is right, I will help them. We must all lift each other up. Todd's voice choked with emotion. He finally understood his father. He was not just a prospector. He was a builder. A dreamer. The gold was not the treasure. It was just the tool. The tool to build a community. The tool to create a legacy of kindness, not power. He looked at Sylvia. Her eyes were shining with tears. He was a good man, she whispered. A great man. Todd knew what he had to do. The decision came to him as easy as breathing. This gold, he said. It is not mine. It belongs to the valley. It belongs to his dream. They made the decision to use the gold to help other struggling ranchers. They would finish what Henry Steele had started. I watched them from the hill above. I had seen so much change in this valley. I saw Pennington in town. He was working with his hands for the first time in his life. He was helping rebuild what he had helped destroy. He was finding a new kind of wealth. I saw Marshall Tate. He walked with a new purpose. He was not just a hunter anymore. He was a guardian. He was planting roots. I reflected on the changes in everyone. The West was a hard land. It could break a man. It could turn him into a monster like Morrison. Or it could forge him into something strong. Something noble, like Todd Steele. He had faced the darkness. He had won. He had found not just gold. He had found his father's glory. He had found his own. I watched as Todd and Sylvia stood. They held hands. They looked at the creek for a long moment. Then they turned. They walked away from the water. They walked toward the charred foundation of the old cabin. They were not looking at a ruin. They were looking at a space to build something new. Together. Chapter 24. The stars are bright tonight. Sylvia's voice was a soft whisper in the cool night air. We sat on the porch of the new ranch house. It was a fine house. Sturdy. Built with timber from the mountains and money from the rodeo purse. But it was built mostly with hope. Todd had rebuilt his home. Now, he was ready to build his life. He stood beside her. He did not look at the stars. He looked at her. Her face was illuminated by the golden light from the open door. He had faced down gunfighters. He had battled fires and floods. But his hands trembled now. His heart was a wild drum against his ribs. He had wanted to ask her for months. He had waited for the right time. For a moment of peace. The moment was now. I remember the first time I saw you, he began. His voice was husky. You were taming that wild stallion. You were fierce. You were beautiful. I thought you were the most amazing thing I had ever seen. He took her hand. I came to this valley with nothing. Just a piece of land and a ghost map. I was fighting for my father's past. You taught me to fight for a future." He knelt before her on the rough porch boards. He held her hand in both of his. "Sylvia, Donald. You are my partner. You are my home. I love you." He finally asked Sylvia the question he'd been wanting to ask one. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes. They traced shining paths through the dust on her cheeks. She did not hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh yes, Todd. Yes." The news of their engagement was a happy explosion. It started as a small supper the next evening. Just us. Me and Sweet. Star Circle Bob. His arm was mostly healed now. Sheriff Tate was there too. He brought the pretty schoolteacher with him. Then Pennington arrived. He brought a wagon. It was loaded with food and barrels of beer. "A wedding gift," he said with a shy smile. "From a friend." He was followed by the Miller family. Then the Donovans. Then a dozen more. They came from all corners of the valley. Their engagement celebration became a town-wide festival too. Someone started a great bonfire in the pasture. Fiddles appeared as if by magic. The mournful music of the prairie turned into joyous dance tunes. The valley had been united by tragedy. Now it was united by joy. The people laughed. They danced. They ate and drank under the vast canopy of stars. They were celebrating more than a wedding. They were celebrating their own survival. They were celebrating their new beginning. Todd found me standing by the fire. He had a tin cup of whiskey in his hand. He handed one to me. We stood in silence for a moment. We watched the dancers spin and stomp. "You were there from the beginning, Doc," he said. "You saw me at my worst. You helped me find my best." He looked at me. His eyes were serious. "I want you to be my best man." I was touched. Deeply. I was a drifter. A man without a family. But I had found one here. "I would be honored, son," I told him. "Doc serves as Todd's best man 3. Later in the evening, the talk turned to the future. Todd and Sylvia, and Tate and Star Circle Bob and Pennington and I gathered away from the music. We sat on logs around a smaller fire. We talked about the plans for the future of Rodondo and the surrounding ranches for. "The placer fund is growing," Todd said. He and Sylvia had put all the gold from the creek into a community trust. "It is enough to start the irrigation project. We can bring water to the south pastures." "That will help a dozen families," Star Circle Bob said. He nodded with approval. "And the schoolhouse?" the schoolteacher asked. She looked at Sheriff Tate. "We have the land. We have the plans from Todd's father's journal." Pennington spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm. "I will supply the lumber. My sawmills will deliver it at no cost. It is the least I can do." His redemption was not just in words. It was in deeds. They talked for hours. They were a council of dreamers. They were planning a future built not on greed, but on cooperation, on shared strength. The West was changing. It was becoming a place of laws, a place of communities, a place of hope. Right here in this valley. The fire burned low. The fiddles played their last slow song. Todd found Sylvia by the edge of the dancers. He took her in his arms. They began to dance, a slow circle under the moon. They were the calm center of the joyful storm. After a moment, they stopped. They looked past the fire. They looked beyond the dancers. They looked out into the great darkness of the prairie. They were looking at their land. Chapter 25. "And do you, Sylvia, Donald, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The preacher's voice filled the small sunlit church. 1 year had passed. 1 year of peace. 1 year of progress. The church was new. The townspeople had built it themselves. They built it with lumber from Pennington's mill. They built it with money from the Placer Fund. They built it with their own sweat and their own hope. Sylvia looked at Todd. Her eyes were shining. "I do," she said. Her voice was strong and clear. Todd and Sylvia's wedding was a beautiful affair. The whole town was there. Star Circle Bob sat in the front pew. His eyes were misty. His daughter was marrying a man worthy of her. A man he was proud to call a son. Sheriff Tate stood beside the schoolteacher. She was his wife now. They had married in the spring. He was a man who had found his home. Cliff Pennington was there too. He sat in the back. A quiet and humble man. He had found his own kind of peace. And I stood beside Todd. His best man. My old dusty coat felt out of place. But my heart was full. After the ceremony, the celebration began. It was a true festival. The town had grown into a prosperous community too. New homes dotted the valley. The ranches were thriving. The new irrigation ditches brought water to pastures that had once been brown and barren. Children laughed and played in the street. A street that had once run with blood. The ghosts were gone. They were replaced by the sounds of life. Later, Todd pulled me away from the noise. He walked me to the corral behind his new home. A magnificent sorrel horse stood there. It was Tony. His leg had healed. A thin white scar was the only reminder of the saboteur's knife. He was a proud and beautiful animal. In the pasture beside him were 3 young foals. They had his copper coat. They had his powerful build. Tony has sired a line of champion horses 3. His legacy was secure. His strength would run in this valley for generations. "He is a fighter," Todd said. He stroked the great horse's neck. "Just like this town." That evening, I sat on the porch. I watched the last of the sun's light paint the sky. The party was winding down. The fiddles played a soft and gentle tune. I lit a cigar. I settled back in my chair. I began my final reflection. I thought about the strange and violent path that had brought us all to this peaceful evening. I reflected on love and friendship and the adventures that brought them all together for. Love was a powerful force. It had given Todd the strength to face down his demons. It had given Sylvia the courage to defy a world that tried to control her. Friendship was a quiet strength. It was the bond that held us together when everything else was falling apart. It was Swede's loyalty. It was Tate's unexpected alliance. It was my own stubborn refusal to walk away. I thought about the changes in the West. The country was growing. The wild days were ending. The railroad was coming. The telegraph lines were being strung. Soon, the isolation of a town like Rodondo would be a thing of the past. The world was getting smaller. There would be new challenges, new fights, new kinds of villains who used laws and contracts instead of guns. Hints at new adventures on the horizon as the American West continues to evolve. 5. But the people of this valley would be ready. They had been forged in fire. They had learned to stand together. They had learned that the real treasure was not gold in a creek. It was the community they built, the families they raised, the future they created with their own hands. Todd and Sylvia walked out onto the porch. They stood together. They held hands. They looked out at the vast and beautiful land. It was their kingdom, a kingdom built on honor and courage and love. My work here was done. I was a drifter, a man who watched stories unfold. And this story had reached its happy end. Soon, it would be time for me to move on, to find another town, another story. But I would carry this one with me, always. I took a long draw from my cigar. I let the smoke curl up into the purple twilight. The first star of evening appeared, a lone diamond in an endless sky. It was a beautiful night, a night of peace, a night of ever after.